Chapter 468. Since he was bringing a guest out to play, Dake naturally couldn't bring his family. He only brought the little demon beast, picked up the book, and left the bedroom. He also had a bottle of candy in his hand. Olga saw that he needed it, so she stayed up late last night to make it. It was sweet and slightly sour. After waiting for a while at the appointed place, Aurora came over with a fragrant wind. She wore a hollowed-out embroidered sun hat and a snow-white ruffled dress. She wore white silk gloves and a pair of cute short shoes. Her hands were clenched in front of her, and she looked nervous. Unlike Dake, who was used to interacting with the opposite sex, Aurora didn't interact much with strange men. She had just turned 12, and it was her first time going out alone with a boy, so she was a bit shy. However, she knew a lot about Dake, so he wasn't a stranger. Then I'll introduce myself again. I'm Dake Dimung, your future senior. When Aurora came closer, Dake reached out his hand. Website. https://m. Vipcanshu. VIP. Aurora raised her hand and shook it, saying shyly, Aurora Montier Folly. Dake smiled and let go. Then let's go. Do you have anywhere you want to go? He was just asking casually. After all, Aurora had never been to the capital since she grew up, so she shouldn't know much about the capital's territory. However, he never thought that when he asked, Aurora would take out a piece of paper from her little bag. There were a few places written on the paper, so she had come prepared. When Dake showed a surprised expression, Aurora just happened to sneak a glance. Her face instantly turned red, and she said meekly, just a few. As she spoke, she tilted the note slightly in an attempt to block Dark's view. Dake couldn't help but want to laugh, but he held it in. It's okay. Come one by one. We have plenty of time. Okay. Aurora nodded her head slightly. Dark was the first to walk out. Apart from knowing that she was Diana's cousin, Linley didn't know much about the little girl whom the Castellan had brought with him. However, judging from her demeanor, she should be a very obedient and sensible girl. This kind of girl was indeed likable. But in the end, that was all there was to it. As they approached the door, Dake slowed down and asked, Where do you want to go first? Aurora thought for a moment and said, Blue Jade Street. Blue Jade Street? Dake repeated in his heart and said, Let's go to Blue Jade Street first. Blue Jade Street was neither too far nor too close to the Duke's mansion. It would take about 15 minutes by carriage. He wasn't surprised that Aurora wanted to go to Blue Jade Street. After all, it was a famous Jade Street with many famous jewelry stores. Wasn't it normal for the daughter of a city lord to want to visit a jewelry store? However, after paying some attention, he realized that Aurora wasn't wearing any jewelry. Compared to the noble ladies in the capital, she was too simple. Dake thought casually, since we're going to Blue Jade Street, I'll buy her a gift in return. After all, she received such a precious flaming sun elf egg. The Duke's mansion's main door was already open. The two guards were standing straight and upright. A luxurious carriage with the Dimming family's emblem was parked at the entrance. Beside the carriage was a dragon tamer guard. The Duke's mansion had a few flying dragons in the mansion. They were private breeders, and the dragon tamer guard was responsible for taming the flying dragons. Not only did they know how to tame flying dragons, they weren't weak either. They could ride dragons and fight. When Dake went out, he usually had two guards. One was the coachman, and the other was his personal bodyguard. Because the horse pulling the carriage was a dragon wildebeest with a trace of dragon blood, the coachman would usually be a dragon tamer guard. As for the personal bodyguard, he would choose one of the 12 head maidservants. In the past, the one who accompanied him the most was the Aries Olga. However, Olga had many things to do today, so she gave the other head maidservants a chance. When Dake stepped out of the door with Aurora, a head maidservant wearing a standard maid uniform walked out from the other side of the carriage. That was the lion Trina Dimung. Trina was 1.8 meters tall. Her short hair reached her ears, and her legs were extremely long. Her hair was brown, and her eyes were the same color. The corners of her eyes were slightly raised, revealing a trace of fierceness. As a maidservant, she carried a sword with her, and there was even a dagger hidden under her long skirt. Trina was in charge of the Lion Palace maidservants. Their job was combat, and the Scorpio Palace maidservants were in charge of assassination. Dake and Trina didn't interact much, but the number of times Trina went out with him was probably second only to Olga. After all, she specialized in combat, and her swordsmanship had been personally taught by our vet. She was deeply trusted by our vet. Dake didn't dislike her either. After all, she didn't talk much. "Greetings, young master." When Dake came closer, Trina immediately knelt on one knee and raised her head. "Get up," Dake said curiously. "Why didn't I see you 2 days ago?" Trina only revealed a very faint smile. "I just rushed back." "That's true. After all, you often go out." Dake nodded and turned to walk towards the carriage. He first boarded the carriage, then squatted down and reached out his hand. Aurora's cheeks were slightly red, but she still placed her hand in his palm. Then, she used her other hand to lift her skirt slightly, and lifted her foot to step onto the carriage board. Dake exerted more force and pulled her up. The two then entered the carriage. There weren't many things inside. There were only small pieces of fruit, and a few small forks on the small table in the middle. Dake guided Aurora to sit by the window while he sat opposite her. Then he casually picked up a piece of fruit with a fork and put it into his mouth. He chewed carefully, and the juice was sweet. Trina then bent over and entered, asking, "Where are we going?" Dake said, "Blue Jade Street." Trina then turned to open the door and said to the Dragon Tamer guard, "Blue Jade Street." "Okay," the Dragon Tamer guard replied and waved the reins. The carriage began to move slowly. Because the chassis of the carriage had been installed with a special magic array, it almost didn't feel bumpy inside the carriage. When the carriage stabilized, Dake took the initiative to find a topic to talk about. "Aurora, what kind of city is the City of Freedom?" Aurora took off her hat and put it on her knees, whispering, "It's a very lively place. Although it still can't solve the residents' domestic needs very well right now, it's constantly improving. It'll definitely get better and better in the future." Dake said, "I heard that it's very dangerous outside the City of Freedom?" Aurora nodded and said, "After all, it was built in the former territory of the demons. There will be attacks from demons every once in a while. But we're doing our best to develop the adventurer culture. We've already successfully applied to establish an adventurers guild. More and more people are coming to the city to help us clean up the surrounding demons." Dake said, "The demons themselves are both danger and wealth. With an endless supply of demons, it means that the City of Freedom will always have a way to obtain demon materials. The industries derived from this, such as processing and trading, may become the pillars of the City of Freedom." Aurora said with a hint of excitement, "It's like this. I hope that one day, the City of Freedom will become the world's largest trading market for demon materials. When that time comes, more and more people will come in and out of the City of Freedom. These people will let go of their prejudices against mixed bloods in their interactions, allowing mixed bloods to be accepted little by little. Once mixed bloods can be treated equally in other places, the City of Freedom will be truly free." Dake said with a smile, "That day will definitely come." Aurora grabbed the brim of her hat and lowered her head. "Thank you." The carriage moved quickly with the dragon wildebeest pulling it, and soon entered the city. The carriage slowed down. Dake opened the curtains and looked out, enjoying the joy of seeing familiar scenes with a different mindset. Aurora followed suit and observed the ecology on both sides of the street. The City of Freedom was naturally far less lively than the city of the capital. Aurora looked and looked, then suddenly asked, "Are there wanderers in the capital?" Dake was a little curious about why she suddenly asked such a question, so he said, "Why, what did you see?" Aurora said, "Two wanderers are arguing." Dake said, "The world is moving forward, and there are always people who can't keep up. Moreover, there are countless sorrows left behind by war, and wanderers are just one of them. Someone has set up a wanderer rescue station in various places, but not all wanderers are willing to be rescued." Aurora was puzzled. Why aren't they willing to be rescued? Dake was silent for a moment, then said, "Dignity, laziness. Some people can't put aside their dignity, and some people are unwilling to work. The core of the Wanderer Rescue Station is to help wanderers get jobs, not to let them eat and drink for free." Aurora fell into deep thought. Soon, confusion flowed from both sides, and the clamor hit them in the face. They arrived at Blue Jade Street. The carriage stopped by the side, and Trina got off first, followed by Aurora, and then Dake. Aurora was still a child after all, and her eyes lit up when she saw the bustling scene around her that she had never seen before. People came and went on Blue Jade Street, and from time to time, loud shouts could be heard. The sounds of quarreling seemed to have completely blended in, and didn't seem out of place at all. This wasn't a real high-end jewelry district, and the people here were all mixed up. Dake walked in front with great familiarity, introducing all kinds of shops to Aurora. Aurora listened on the side, but didn't show any intention of entering the shop to observe. It was only when Dake mentioned a jade shop called Flowing Sky Square that her eyes lit up, and she said, "Can I go in and take a look?" Dake looked at the brand new signboard of the Flowing Sky Square, and couldn't help but have a strange look. But he still nodded and said, "Of course." So, the two of them walked into the Flowing Sky Square accompanied by Trina. As one of the most famous shops on Blue Jade Street, the Flowing Sky Square mainly sold unprocessed raw stones. Of course, there were also jade ornaments, but they were all made by the shop owner himself out of hobby. When Dake entered, there were originally many people inside. But as he walked in, the expressions of the people gathered in the center suddenly changed, and they all put down what they were doing, lowered their heads, and slipped out of the shop in a hurry. The shop owner of the Flowing Sky Square's expression changed greatly, and even revealed a look of panic. But seeing that Dake didn't have any intention of leaving, the shop owner had no choice but to brace himself and walk out to greet him. "Isn't this young Master Dimming? What brings you here?" The shop owner was in his 40s or 50s, and he wore ordinary clothes, but there was a green jade ring around his neck, and his wrists were covered with jade bracelets, which made him look like he was wearing jewelry. Dake knew him from a few years ago, and he didn't hold back. "Bring someone here to play, and take out your best things." The shopkeeper glanced at the delicate Aurora, and immediately understood what was going on. But just as he was about to turn around and take out the bottom of the box, Aurora said, "Don't, I'm not here to buy jewelry. Do you have raw stones that haven't been cut yet?" "Yes, we do." The shop owner stopped and wiped the sweat off his forehead. In fact, his shop's main business was to gamble on raw stones. But in front of that little ancestor, he really didn't dare. Aurora said excitedly, "Then take some out and let me see." The shop owner had no choice but to drag out an uncovered box from behind the counter. The box was filled with raw stones of all sizes that hadn't been cut yet. Because these raw stones were buried deep underground, they were still wrapped in a layer of weathered skin after being mined. Without cutting that layer of rock, the original appearance couldn't be seen clearly. There was no way to know the quality of the jade inside. The shop owner bid, the buyer bought, and then the rock layer of the raw stone was cut open on the spot, revealing the jade inside. If the quality was higher than the purchase price, then it was a profit. If the quality was lower than the purchase price, then it was a loss. This was also commonly known as stone gambling. But here, not only were they gambling on raw jade, but they were also gambling on more expensive rare metals or magic stone ores. Aurora squatted down and picked at the box of raw stones. Dake accompanied her and had nothing to do, so he also looked inside. But Aurora couldn't see past it. After picking for a long time, she stood up. Dake asked curiously, "Aren't you going to try?" "No," Aurora said happily. "I'm just here to take a look." After saying that, she didn't even look at the jewelry and walked out of the Flowing Sky Square. Dake was confused. The shop owner was overjoyed. Then Aurora entered a few more stone gambling jewelry shops. Every time, she was in high spirits, but she didn't have enough to buy anything. Seeing that time was passing and an hour was about to pass, she still didn't buy anything. Even Dake couldn't help but come closer and say, "Do you want to buy one?" "No." Aurora shook her head hard. "I don't have that much money." The shop owner standing at the side didn't dare to say that the raw stones in the shop were very cheap. They just wanted to send this god of plague away as soon as possible. After leaving the last shop, Aurora was obviously satisfied and took out the note again. She pointed to the second line and said, "Let's go to the next place?" The carriage started moving again. When it stopped again, it was already in front of a high-end dessert shop called Sweet Honey. Dake thought that Aurora came because of the shop's reputation, but he didn't expect that it was true. However, she still didn't buy anything. The three of them walked inside for more than 10 minutes. Aurora looked at the desserts that were displayed one by one. Then when Dake said that he wanted to buy something, she shook her head and said no. But just as the three of them were about to leave, the shop owner hurried out with a whole plate of steaming pastries in her hands. She presented the pastries with a flattering face and said respectfully, "Young Master Dimming, this is the shop's newest pastry. Please try it." Dake glanced at Aurora, who was unmoved, and said, "Then try it. Bring a pot of black tea." Okay. The shop owner was obviously relieved. She personally led Dake into the small restaurant indoors. Dake asked Aurora to sit down. Trina stood by the side. The shop owner quickly brought a pot of high-quality black tea. Then, she took out the teacups and poured them one by one. "Go about your business." Dake waved her away and tasted the pastries. The shop owner couldn't ask for more. After Dake tasted a little, he said, "The taste is okay. Don't you want to try some?" Aurora didn't refuse. She picked up a piece of pastry and tasted it carefully. Then, she narrowed her eyes as if she was analyzing the ingredients used in the pastry. After a while, she seemed to feel that she had analyzed it thoroughly. Then she ate the whole pastry. Dake said calmly, "How's the taste?" Aurora nodded slightly. "It's great." Dake didn't say anything else. He turned to look at the crowd outside the floor-to-ceiling window. His eyes showed some memories. After finishing the pastry in front of him, Dake refused the shop owner's offer to order more. Instead, he asked Trina to pay the holy coins. Under the shop owner's flattered gaze, the three of them left the high-end dessert shop. Then they continued to shop. "Where's the next place?" Dake asked. Aurora pointed to the name written on the third line of the note and said, "Star Cluster Building." Star Cluster Building then. Dake was quite comfortable. Having a clear location like this was better than wandering around aimlessly. He still preferred a planned life. The Star Cluster Building was some distance away. They got back into the carriage and continued forward. About 20 minutes later, they arrived at a bustling area. From here on out, it was already a trade area for the nobles. The prices inside and outside were on a different level. With the dragon wildebeest leading the way, naturally, no one had the guts to block the way. However, the nobles who were active here spread the news like the wind. Although the age gap would lead to different circles, Dake's identity was there, and he naturally had the attribute of breaking the circle. Some of the people who had been viciously pranked by him at the age of 12 or 13 immediately avoided him. Some of the older ones, however, had their own thoughts. After 9 months, what kind of waves could the son of a duke, who had returned to the capital once more, cause? The Star Cluster Building was located at the most dazzling location in this area. The building was 20-some meters tall, and had a total of 6 floors. It covered an area of more than 3 mu and was hexagonal in shape. On each corner stood a stone pillar, and on each pillar stood the statues of 6 people. One of the statues was the most conspicuous. It was the statue of first Prince Charles. The nobles who mingled in this area all took pride in erecting statues on stone pillars. But now in the Star Cluster Building, there was a statue that had been cut in half at the waist, leaving only the lower half. The cut was incomparably smooth. It had been more than a year since that statue had been cut in half, but no one dared to replace it. It had become a unique sight in the Star Cluster Building. "Is this the Star Cluster Building?" The carriage stopped 10 meters away from the Star Cluster Building. Aurora stuck her head out of the window and looked up at the tall Star Cluster Building. Her gaze finally rested on the statue that had been cut in half at the waist. Her eyes sparkled. Dake followed her gaze and looked over, but couldn't help but reveal an awkward expression. Young and impetuous, young and impetuous. Trina gently stroked the hilt of her sword, but only snorted softly. The Star Cluster Building, which had gradually become lively because it was close to noon, suddenly became silent as if a gust of wind had blown past. The carriage drove in through the main entrance and stopped in the inner square. After Dake and the other two came out of the carriage, an attendant hurried over. "Do you want to come together? We'll be staying in the Star Cluster Building for a long time," Dake said to the Dragon Tamer Guard. The Dragon Tamer Guard was clearly stunned. Perhaps the young master, had never cared about their feelings until now. But he still loyally said, "No, if I'm not here, no one can control this dragon wildebeest." Dake said. "Then get someone to buy whatever you want. I'll reimburse you." Reimburse. The dragon tamer guard took a long time to understand the meaning of this word. He couldn't help but feel happy. Who wouldn't want to have an easy-to-serve young master at home? It seemed that the young master had really changed after a year of school. The Sheng Malian was good. The Sheng Malian was really good. After the dragon tamer guard accompanied by the attendant led the carriage away, Dake and the other two turned into the building. The concept of the Star Cluster building was actually quite similar to Soul Captivation. It was just that the customer base and class were different. The Star Cluster building could be said to be the most frequented place of consumption by the nobles in the imperial city. It also took into account that the nobles were shy about money, so it wasn't all expensive. Of course, Dake Dimming had never had any concerns in this regard. After all, in the past he didn't touch the stench of money with his 10 fingers and relied on the maids to pay the bill. And now it was the same. Dake Dimming only had academic credits in his hands, and no holy coins. "Welcome, young Master Dimming." The attendant who came in front of him was quite beautiful. Dake also felt that she looked slightly familiar. He nodded slightly and said, "Tell this young lady about the specialties of the Star Cluster building." Although the attendant's legs were trembling, she forced herself to stand straight and fluently introduced the specialties to Aurora. Aurora listened carefully, and when she finished, she suddenly said, "What about the sword mark on the 6th floor? Is it still there?" The attendant's face suddenly stiffened, and she turned her neck around like a robot to look at Dake. "It should have been fixed. After all, it's not good to keep leaking air," Dake said casually. The attendant's face changed drastically, and her legs trembled even more. The supervisor of the Star Cluster building pushed her out to receive young Master Dimming, and used her to block the disaster. Back then, young Master Dimming asked the maid behind him to pierce through the wall with a sword. Not only did the wall of the 6th floor directly open, but it also cut the statue in half in an instant, and it was explicitly ordered not to be repaired. Because it was not explicitly stated that the wall could not be repaired, and young Master Dimming was miraculously accepted by the Sheng Malian Academy, and the person who cut the statue in half was very aggressive. The supervisor endured the pressure and repaired the wall, but he still did not dare to repair the statue. Now that young Master Dimming had returned from the academy, no one dared to touch him. Only she, who had a strong family background, was forced to receive the guest. When she came, she still had a trace of hope. She did not expect young Master Dimming to become even more ruthless after returning. Although young Master Dimming was bossy and domineering, he always spoke his mind and never hid it in his heart. So it was easy to deal with him. Right from the start, there was a hidden dagger in his words. In fact, it made people tremble with fear. It said that the academy is a microcosm of society. Could it be that young Master Dimming has returned after experiencing many hardships? The attendant did not dare to speak. Dark, on the other hand, did not really care. Aurora, on the other hand, was very interested in the sword mark on the 6th floor. She even whispered, "Why don't we go to the 6th floor first?" Dake looked at her strangely. When Aurora took out that piece of paper, he felt strange. Along the way, he had a strange feeling. Now that they were at the Star Cluster building, Aurora's intention was even more obvious. He finally realized that the child's itinerary couldn't have been drawn along his glorious past achievements, could it? When he was 8 years old, he heard that stone gambling was fun, so he took Olga to the Flowing Sky Square on Blue Jade Street. At that time, the owner of the Flowing Sky Square could tell that he was a noble, so he tried his best to promote the quality of his raw stones. The 8-year-old Dake did not have any concept of money. He only wanted to open stones for fun, so he did not reject anyone, and opened up the entire stock of the Flowing Sky Square. When a relative of the Duke's mansion heard about this, he hurried over and appraised all the jade stones he opened up. And the total price was not even 1% of the raw stones he bought. Dake did not know anything else, but this ratio of 100 to 1 was very clear, so he directly smashed the memorial arch of the Flowing Sky Square. If the owner of the Flowing Sky Square had not woken up early and cried desperately in the end, saying that he would not accept a single penny. The shop would have been burned down. Of course, the kind little Dake finally paid the equivalent of 1% of the price of the raw stones and bought all the raw stones he opened up. Those raw stones were eventually taken to the pool in the backyard and used to play with water. As for the other shops on Blue Jade Street, he occasionally patronized them and left some traces of fighting. As for that sweet honey dessert shop, it was really burned down. But it was not because of the dessert shop, but because Dake fought with someone in the shop. Although he couldn't quite remember who the noble child who could release the fireball was, it was still something that had happened. As for the star cluster building, that happened in the first half of last year. Therefore, Dake still remembered it clearly. At that time, for some reason, someone suddenly mocked him in front of him that he was not in the 6 statues of the star cluster building. So, we boys have to get what we want. Dake Dimung called the supervisor and directly asked for a statue. But those 6 statues represented people who were not to be trifled with, or else they would not have been erected. The supervisor did not dare to provoke those people, so he chose to reason with them and explained the rules of erecting the statues one by one. In short, he said a lot. It was nothing more than what kind of achievements to achieve in a few years. Then, according to the size of the achievements, there were a total of 6. Little Dake was not really an unreasonable person. He was very clear that his achievements were at most tearing down a few houses, so he did not force the supervisor to erect his statue. After all, a statue erected like that would not live up to its name, and would easily become a laughingstock. But if he did not erect the statue, would he be able to relax? Of course not. So Dake ordered, and his personal maid, Trina, swung her sword. Everyone only saw the flash of the sword, and there was an extremely long sword mark on the wall. The person who mocked Dake in front of him, his statue was cut in half at the waist. The statue that fell from the sky directly smashed the door of the star cluster building, and the huge roar shook the entire aristocratic trade area. Of course, the moment Trina pulled out her sword, she had already sensed through the aura that no one had passed through. After that sword, the person whose statue was cut in half, a tuft of hair instantly fell from the top of his head, scaring him so much that he almost fell to the ground. In any case, he was the son of the Marquis, so he was not scared to the point of peeing his pants. His bodyguard suddenly pulled out his sword, but when Trina withdrew her sword, the sword momentum rose sharply in the opposite direction, instantly suppressing the bodyguard to the point that he could not even breathe. The famous sword in his hand actually trembled with a woo-woo sound. The overwhelming difference in strength between the two sides caused the battle that seemed as if blood would splatter on the spot in an instant to come to an abrupt end. It also made the onlookers and the supervisor of the star cluster building rejoice. But now, it seemed that in the year that Dake Dimung went to school at the Shungmalian Academy, the son of the Marquis seemed to have risen again. Dake thought for a moment. What was the name of the Marquis child again? By the way, who was the statue that was cut in half at the waist? Dake asked casually. Trina said with a calm expression. It's the youngest son of Marquis Middleton, Joshua. Dake nodded. So that's his name. I wonder if he's here? Plop. When the pitiful waitress heard this conversation, she fell to the ground with a paw sound, and was so scared that her whole body was trembling like a chaff. What's wrong with her? Dake was baffled. But he still quickly squatted down and grabbed her hand and asked with concern. Miss, are you okay? I'm fine. The waitress' face was pale, and her limbs were weak. The hand that Dake held was like a vibrator, and even her words were trembling. It was as if the youngest son of the Marquis had been cut in half at the waist in front of her. Her symptoms were so obvious that Dake couldn't help but frown. If you're not feeling well, it's best not to force yourself to come to work. If you have any difficulties, you can tell me. No, the waitress quickly said. I just didn't sleep well. Dake sighed. I didn't think that a place like the Star Cluster building would force their employees to work. You go rest, I'll talk to your supervisor later. No, please don't. I'm really fine. The waitress instantly exploded with strength, and actually supported herself to stand up. Dake saw that her waist was no longer bent, and her legs were no longer trembling, so he helplessly shook his head. Then let's go to the 6th floor first. Beside him, Aurora's mouth was slightly open, and she didn't know what to say for a moment. Even though she was already helping Mayor Montefiore with internal affairs, she was still too inexperienced when it came to grasping people's hearts. Under the strong waitress lead, the three of them went up to the 6th floor of the Star Cluster building. 4 and 1 8,000 plus. Give me the money, Rude. Chapter 469. The 6th floor of the Star Tower was a place similar to a private club. There were no products for sale there, and even food, drinks, and entertainment were free. But those who were qualified to enter were the more powerful nobles in the capital. The most powerful of them was naturally the eldest prince, Charles, who had a statue on the stone pillar. It was because of the eldest prince's background that the Star Tower could remain safe and sound under the watchful eyes of so many nobles. Otherwise, such a big piece of fat meat would have been eaten up long ago. Other than the 6 statues, the Star Tower would often publish comparisons and rankings between young people. Some were sensationalist, while others were very valuable for reference. Dake used to be an influential figure in the capital. Although he was young, his status was still there, so he was often on the list. Of course, he wasn't very interested in these things. In the past, he had always been a hot-tempered person, doing whatever he thought of. He wanted to compete, but not much. Remember the URL. VIP, can't you? VIP. The sun was shining brightly today. The nobles on the 6th floor were having an emergency meeting. When the carriage appeared outside the nobles' trade zone, this group of people knew that Dake Dimming had returned, and all of them had an emotional reaction. The one who had the biggest reaction was Marquis Middleton's youngest son, Joshua. Joshua was 16 years old this year. He wasn't very old, but in this world he was considered an adult. Originally, during the war, 14 years old was considered an adult. It was the relative peace of the past decade that caused the adult line to be pushed back by 2 years. Moreover, the development of the times caused the growth of children's intelligence to slow down, and the adult line was likely to be pushed back by another 2 years. But at least for now, Joshua was already an adult. His father, Marquis Middleton, was a new noble who rose during the war. Although he was slightly inferior to our vet in terms of fame, he was already an extremely powerful warrior. Not to mention that he was also a veteran strategist. Before the development of magical technology, the power system of this world was mainly based on magic and chi. Magic was profound and difficult to master, and humans generally lacked enough magic to support it, so they were far inferior to the demons. In order to fight against the demons, they developed the chi that only humans could control. The so-called chi was a mysterious power that was stimulated from the human body's chakras. Sorcerers believed that chi was actually a type of magic. On the other hand, the saint believed that chi was a kind of innate supernatural ability of saint, which was passed down through generations and hidden in the chakras of the human body. Both of these statements had basis, because other than human beings, demons didn't have chakras. The effect of chi was essentially the same as the effect of some buff spells. In other words, it could only be used to strengthen the body. There were 7 chakras in the human body. These 7 chakras were the 7 energy gathering points, which dominated different tissue systems in the human body. They were the crown chakra, the glabella chakra, the throat chakra, the heart chakra, the umbilical chakra, the sea chakra, and the Brahma chakra. Every time a human opened a chakra, their control over their body would be improved to a higher level. The quality and quantity of chi would also increase accordingly. Among the 7 chakras, only the Brahma acupoint was located outside the human body, above the head. If he could open the Brahma meridian wheel, he would be able to release the chi and form an extremely oppressive force. A sufficiently powerful force could even form an effect similar to that of a dragon's might and suppress the targets whose mental power was relatively weak. But even so, the popularization of chi could only allow humans to barely withstand the attacks of the demons. Its limitations were very large, and it was still far inferior to magic. What's more, demons were born with strong physiques. Any demon powerhouse's physique wouldn't be weaker than a human warrior who had opened all 7 chakras. In order to increase the upper limit, humans would usually cultivate both chi and magic. Before the development of magical technology, the purebred human's most powerful profession was the demon warrior, who cultivated both qi and magic. Marquis Middleton was a powerful demon warrior, and as his son, Joshua was also a demon warrior, and when he was only 14 years old, he had already followed his father to eliminate a large number of extremists. He was a rare powerhouse among the noble children. His statue could be erected on the stone pillar because of his meritorious deeds. On the contrary, in the first half of last year, Dake Dimming was nothing but the son of the Duke. He was also rude, arrogant and despotic, so he could only say that he deserved it when he was ridiculed. But after that day, Joshua was called to the study by Marquis Middleton for a long talk through the night. The next day Joshua, who came out of the study, was a little more shrewd. He still hadn't forced the Star Cluster building to repair the statue, which was a kind of performance. He was waiting for Dake Diming's return. He wanted to defeat him head-on, and then erect his statue on the stone pillar again to wash away the stain on his name. Joshua, who was sitting on the sofa, had a serious expression. Although he had been studying at the Royal Academy, he still paid attention to Dake Diming's news. He heard that Dake Diming was doing well in the Shungmalian Academy, and was no longer the same as before. It was still unknown who would win today's battle. But that's good. If I were to duel with someone who doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken, it would seem that I had an unfair advantage. My Middleton family relied on military exploits to rise and control the Knights of the Magic Sword. We can be deceitful during wartime, but we must be open and aboveboard in our daily affairs. With my ability, I will follow the family rules, Joshua said slowly, his gaunt face glowing with vitality. Although the nobles sitting around him did not flatter him, they all applauded and were full of admiration. In fact, the son of the Duke was too arrogant. He never established relations with others and even chased them away. In this Star Cluster building, even if there were people who wanted to get close to him, they were all rejected at the door, and became like this without a single fan. However, only 1/3 of the nobles centered around Joshua. The other 2/3 were just chatting and laughing, watching the drama unfold. Not long after, footsteps came from the staircase. He's here. Joshua's gaze focused and looked at the staircase. Almost everyone stopped their discussion, and their eyes instantly focused on that spot. Then Dake Dimming, as expected, appeared at the place where everyone's attention was focused on. The son of the Duchess, whom they had not seen for almost a year, was dressed very formally. His blonde hair was meticulously combed, and his skin was as smooth as jade. It was even better than those famous girls on the list. His expression was gentle, and his temperament was mellow and elegant. At a glance, it was like a spring breeze, making people mistakenly think that he was the descendant of a sage. However, the young noble who ascended to the 6th floor was indeed the son of the Duchess that they were familiar with. At this moment, not only Joshua, but almost everyone's eyes revealed a trace of astonishment. In terms of change, everyone would have changed in almost a year. For example, Joshua had matured a lot, and his personality had been corrected. However, compared to Dake Diming's obvious change, it was far from enough. This made people wonder if Dake Dimming had truly been reborn, or if he had learned how to disguise himself. It was a choice between the two. Without a doubt, the latter was more acceptable. After all, the bad boy becoming worse was what most people expected. However, if that was the case, Dake Diming's difficulty would probably skyrocket. Those who did not have much interaction with Dake paid more attention to making themselves invisible. After Joshua recovered from his initial shock, he did the opposite and took the initiative to stand up. The fans around him also habitually stood by his side and behind him. Joshua strode to the staircase and reached out his hand to Dake. Dake stared at Joshua's face for a while, and after a while, he confirmed that this should be the son of the Marquis who was frightened by Katrina's influence. Thus he reached out his hand and said, "Joshua Middleton?" As the saying went, shake hands and make peace. Dake Dimming was not an unreasonable person. Everyone shook hands, complimented each other, and the incident last year would be over. After that, without any grudges, they could sit comfortably on the 6th floor for a while, eat, and leave. Wouldn't that be great? For such a social place, Dark Diamond did not avoid it. This was already a form of confidence in his own willpower. However, Joshua's face darkened slightly. He said, "Long time no see, Dake." "It has been almost a year." Dake retracted his hand and walked past him. Following closely behind, Aurora and Trina arrived side by side. Leaving the strong female attendant behind, Aurora placed her hands in front of her stomach. Although she was a little timid, she still looked around curiously. Katrina, on the other hand, ignored the people around her. She did not even look at Joshua. Joshua suddenly felt like he was a streetlight on the side of the road, illuminating the path for the three of them. Of course, he could not just stand there like that. After all, before Dake came up, he had already stated his intentions. "Wait, Dake." Thus he immediately called out. Dake stopped in his tracks and turned to look at him. "What's wrong?" Joshua hesitated when he was stared at by Dake Diming's big, pure eyes. He even changed the tone of his prepared speech. "It's like this. I heard that you learned a lot in the Shungmalian Academy. Do you want to spar? Let's stop here." He was very friendly. Dake did not sense any malice. He was confused. "But aren't you a demon warrior?" Joshua did not understand. He said, "Yes. Is there a problem?" Dake raised his hand. The little fiend immediately flew onto the back of his hand like a little bird, but did not step on it. Dake then said, "But I'm a magister." Joshua glanced at the familiar that was obviously a fiend. He thought to himself, Dark Diamond is indeed a fiend. However, he did not mind Dake's words. He said, "A magister is indeed the highest level among fighters, but we demon warriors are not to be trifled with." As he spoke, he took a step forward. His entire body's aura condensed in an instant. The 6 chakras in his body simultaneously produced surging aura, which then rushed to the top of his head. It actually formed the image of a terrifying beast on the Brahma meridian wheel above his head. Shockingly, it was an extremely special force. The force of 10,000 beasts slowly unfolded. It was as if 10,000 beasts were galloping and tigers were roaring for 1,000 miles. This is? Dake did not know much about aura and force, but he could clearly see that Joshua had reached an extremely high level. Some of the surrounding nobles were shocked by the ferocious force of 10,000 beasts. Their faces were pale as they retreated. Some of them even trembled. However, this force was undoubtedly child's play compared to the divine might of the moon goddess. Dake only frowned slightly and treated it as a breeze. He did not feel the slightest bit. Katrina, who was already beside him, had a stress reaction in that instant. However, perhaps because she saw that the young master was not as frightened as she had feared, the force of sword that she had just revealed was instantly retracted. However, the 2 sun-moon elves in Aurora's hair were alarmed. They drilled out of her hair and flew above her head. Some of the knowledgeable people could not help but reveal astonished expressions when they saw the 2 sun-moon elves. They could not help but wonder who this girl who came with Dake was. Aurora, who was under the protection of the sun-moon elves and the ice-moon elves, did not feel anything. Seeing this, the force of 10,000 beasts that Joshua had released could not help but stagnate. Suddenly, it lost its momentum. Dake asked curiously, "This force of might is indeed astonishing. However, if it's only like this, I am a dual cultivator of magic and martial arts. I have not used my full strength," Joshua subconsciously explained. However, this made it seem as if he was begging for pointers from the other party. His fans were instantly speechless. However, Joshua could be considered to have experienced a life and death battle. When facing an opponent who was stronger than him, he had a natural perception. He almost instinctively realized that Dake Dimming, who had no strength to truss a chicken a year ago, was probably above him now. However, a man of character would not go back on his word. Since he had issued a challenge, there was no reason for him to go back on his word. Fortunately, he did not say duel. Instead, he promptly and wisely changed it to exchange pointers. That was really the wisest choice he had made today. While thinking this, Joshua suddenly realized that he had been afraid before the battle. He could not help but feel defeated. That force of 10,000 beasts dropped rapidly. It was no longer as turbulent as it was at the beginning. This obvious change surprised the onlookers. It was just a face-to-face encounter. Dake Dimmon clearly did not do anything. However, Joshua was like a deflated balloon. How did he become a layer of shriveled skin? Those nobles who wanted to see how the two of them would end up were greatly disappointed. Dake could see that Joshua had lost his will to fight. He could not help but shake his head. Forget it. It's rare that we have time. Why don't we change the way we exchange pointers? What way? How could Joshua not understand that Dake was giving him a way out? He could not help but feel a little surprised at Dake Diming's sudden increase in EQ. There was also a trace of fear hidden deep in his heart. How did a person grow to be able to undergo such a terrifying change in a year? Dake Diming gave him the feeling that a carp king had suddenly turned into a violent carp dragon. Of course, he did not know what a carp king and a violent carp dragon were, but it did not stop him from describing it that way. Let's have a round? Dake's expression changed slightly. When he was in the academy, he had to restrain himself and not lose his will to play. However, since it was the holidays and leisure time, why not have a round? Thus, the atmosphere of the scene changed abruptly. Dake ordered the maid to bring a set of magic chess with fixed pieces. He then spread it out in the hall on the 6th floor. The magic chessboard was placed on a jade table. There was a circle of sofas on both sides that could seat 3 people. The rest of the people who wanted to watch the game brought their own chairs and stools and sat by the side. However, if one looked closely, they would find that there was a hint of confusion hidden in their expressions. They could not understand how a normal duel had turned into a competition of magic chess. The class gap between the nobles was vividly displayed in this area. Those who had the right to sit around the table were the children of the nobles. Those who were lower in rank consciously stood and watched the game. Dake asked Trina to relax and sit with Aurora on his left and right. He then straightened the board and said to Joshua, "Have you played this before?" 3 years of experience. Joshua nodded seriously. Oh, so he's an old chess player? Dake's interest was piqued. Although magic chess was called magic chess, it did not require magic power to operate. It had the potential to be popularized. However, without magic power, the viewing effect of magic chess would be much worse. It would also require manual data conversion. After all, every attack between the pieces was supported by data. Moreover, magic chess was very expensive. If the pieces could not move, the feeling would not be reflected. Therefore, it was still popular in a small area. Joshua was a dual cultivator of magic and martial arts. Although his magic power talent was not enough to become a magus, it was more than enough to play magic chess. The two of them soon began the game. The tactical thinking of magic chess was not much different from Chinese chess. That was why Dake could get the hang of it so quickly. Once the game began, the strength of both sides was quickly displayed. It felt like they were evenly matched. Or at least, they were more evenly matched than the combat power of both sides. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the game ended. Dake won by a narrow margin. Perhaps Joshua saw a glimmer of hope for victory, but he was unwilling to give up. He blurted out that he wanted a second round. Dake said, "Then let's play 2 out of 3 games. I'll take 1 game first." In the second game, Joshua pursued aggressively. Dake dealt with it calmly. Although he tried his best, he still lost. Thus, the game became 1-1. Then the third game began. This time, Dark changed his formation. He switched from offense to defense. Instantly, the chess game changed. It was as if thousands of soldiers and horses were attacking the city. They broke down Joshua's defense layer by layer and finally took over the castle in one fell swoop. The moment the castle was breached, Joshua slammed the table and stood up. However, he stood there alone for a while before sitting down dejectedly. Then he said, 3 out of 5 games. Let's eat first. Dake smiled. Neither arrogant victory nor discouraged defeat. The staff of Star Cluster Building, who had been waiting by the side, immediately served the dishes. The manager hiding in the back breathed a sigh of relief. It was fortunate that Dake did not fight with Joshua on the spot. He did not dare to be negligent and ordered the kitchen to continue serving. As for himself, naturally he continued to hide. After all, a gentleman would not stand under a collapsing wall, let alone a villain. Who knew if the young master of the Duke's family would suddenly explode in the middle of the game, or if the son of the Marquis would go crazy? These young people had the most fickle temperament. For a powerless person like him who could only protect himself by relying on the eldest prince, it was better to hide. Of course, whether it was the waitress or the manager, what they imagined did not happen. After Dake, Aurora, and Katrina finished their lunch, they continued to play chess. At first, Dake was worried that Aurora would find it boring. However, when he saw how excited she was while watching the game, he decided to continue playing. Thus, the game went from 1 game to 2 out of 3, to 3 out of 5, and then to 6 out of 11. In the end, when Joshua lost with a score of 2-6, he was too ashamed to continue the game. It was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Dake got up and waved goodbye to him. Then he brought Aurora down to the 5th floor. From the 5th floor to the 2nd floor, there were all kinds of luxuries suitable for the youth trend. However, Aurora obviously had no interest in strolling around here. Thus, the 3 of them went downstairs and headed to their next destination. It was only when they left the Star Cluster building that the nobles on the 6th floor suddenly came back to their senses. Finally, someone could not help but ask, "So what is the purpose of dimming?" The rest of the people were silent. Only Joshua, who lost miserably in the game of magic chess, said, "They are here to shop, right?" Although this was the truth, no one believed it. East of the city, Pet Street. As the years of peace passed, the citizens of the capital who lived a prosperous life began to have spiritual needs. If one was alone, raising 1 or 2 little cuties could make life more interesting. When Dake was in the past, he would often stroll around Pet Street. However, he only touched and did not buy, so he was quite hated by some merchants. Of course, because there was always a beautiful and elegant maid by his side, the merchants didn't dare to say anything even though they were angry. This time, Dake parked the carriage outside the street as usual and walked into the street. He was quite notorious on this street, but at least he did not do anything worse than the other nobles. Thus, the merchants turned a blind eye to it. Of course, Dake did not put on airs when he went out, and he rarely went to nobles' gatherings. Thus, not to mention the general public, even a large number of young nobles only knew of his name. Otherwise, if the merchants knew that the son of the war goddess was here, they would definitely rush to send their little cuties to him. After all, the war goddess's prestige in the kingdom was so resounding. Especially in the capital, she was loved by everyone. Otherwise, they would not be able to compete with the holy church that had taken root in the kingdom for so long. After Dake stepped into Pet Street, he familiarly went to his favorite cat pet shop. Naturally, the pet shop in the city would not sell rare pets like the catgrass, but not all of them were ordinary pets. There were some that had some magical bloodline, or were related to magical animals. "Is this the shop you want to come to?" Dake asked. Aurora nodded. The cat pet shop in front of them was called Spoiling You for a Lifetime. There were a few old cats that could not be sold, so Dake would stroke them a few times every time he came. The owner of Spoiling You for a Lifetime was a fat auntie. It could be said that she was the only one on the street who was especially welcoming to him. At first, it was probably because very few people were willing to play with the old cats. Later, because there was a conflict in the shop, Dake happened to be there, so he asked his maid to help. Of course, he was not a good child who was willing to help others. It was just that the nobles were too noisy, and it affected him from stroking the cats. But no matter what, he did help the pet shop solve a crisis, so he was thanked. This was one of the few good things Dake did. When the fat auntie saw him enter the shop, she immediately brought out a plate of cookies from the room to serve him. Dake picked up a cookie and took a bite, then said, "Where's Fatty?" There was an orange cat in the shop called Fatty. It had been there since Dake first came to the shop, and it had been there for a few years now. Because of its old age, Fatty would always choose a sunny spot and lie there without moving. At that time, Dake, who could not catch Galileo, had a lot of fun stroking it. Children always had a soft spot for the first thing they got. Every time Dake came, he would habitually go to find Fatty. But this time, the fat auntie's expression did not seem right. Dake gradually prepared himself. Then, as expected, the fat auntie sighed and said, "It's gone by Christmas." In the end, it could not withstand the corrosion of the light. The old orange cat did not survive Christmas. Dake could not help but be silent. Aurora, who was originally looking at the kittens excitedly, subconsciously restrained her expression. Birth, old age, illness, and death are always like this, the fat auntie comforted. Don't worry, Fatty fell asleep. Dake nodded. It's okay, let me sit for a while. As he spoke, he casually picked up a chair and moved it under the beam of sunlight that shone in from the window. Every summer, Fatty would lie in this position, and it never changed. Dake was a little stunned as he looked at the circle of sunlight. In a trance, he seemed to hear a long-lost snoring sound. There was dust floating in the sunlight. He just stood there motionlessly for half an hour. Dake finally restrained his expression. When he stood up again, he had already returned to normal. How is it? Do you see any cats that you like? I like all of them. Aurora held a little kitten in her arms and raised her head. Dake asked, pick one to bring back? It can be a companion for Galileo. Aurora shook her head. No, I have to go to school. Cats are not allowed in the school, right? But you can bring cat grass. Dake blinked. Aurora had never been to his bedroom, so how would she know the specialty of Shungmalian Traveler's Street? She suddenly asked curiously, what is cat grass? Dake said, it's a type of grass that has the same characteristics as cats. There is such a thing? Aurora's mouth was half open as she imagined the appearance of cat grass. She wondered which part of the body the roots of cat grass would be connected to. Dake said, it's time to go back. I'll take you to see it when we get back. Aurora replied, okay. After that, Dake and Aurora left the pet street directly. Although he seemed to have returned to normal, Aurora could clearly feel that he was still in low spirits. She did not talk much and accompanied him to the carriage. Then they went back to the Duke's mansion. When the Duke's mansion came into view, the sun above their heads was no longer dazzling. Dake was the first to walk down from the carriage. Then, he held Aurora's hand and helped her get down from the carriage. Aurora was actually born with superhuman strength like Deanna. She also quietly stated that she did not need to be helped along the way. However, Dake seemed to have forgotten. After getting down from the carriage, she quietly walked beside Dake and entered the Duke's mansion with him. Katrina, on the other hand, went their separate ways not long after entering. She still had a lot of things to deal with. Dake went up to the second floor and walked through the amusement arcade-style corridor. He arrived in front of the bedroom door. Then he raised his hand and knocked on the door. But before his hand could fall, the door opened from the inside. The magic guide fairies had already sensed his approach and immediately opened the door. Fairy Evie's ribbon wrapped around his wrist as if it had been engraved into a program. The ribbon conveyed longing and worry. Dake squatted down and hugged Fairy Evie in his arms. Then he called Aurora Indiana. It was Aurora's first time entering a boy's bedroom. Her cheeks were already red. She looked curiously at the room full of magic guide fairies. She was surprised to find that almost all of them were reading books. Although those books were all early reading books with phonetic symbols, they were still enough to shock people to death. Dake did not avoid it. He clapped his hands in the direction of the catnip plants. Immediately, the 5 catnip plants, except for the timid dragon plant that liked the dark, all ran over happily. The cute little creatures ran over with their short legs, making one unable to help but reveal a melting expression. Dake's depressed mood was somewhat relieved. He said to Aurora, "These are catnip plants. There are many types and can be cultivated in the Academy's dormitory." Aurora looked at the catnip plants that were both animals and plants. She could not help but squat down and catch the sprinting catnip plant. She seemed to have a natural affinity with plants. The catnip plant was very obedient and let her hug it. It did not struggle at all. Not long after, she was surrounded by a circle of catnip plants. Dake allowed her to play with the catnip plants. He rested on the sofa for a while. Not long after, the head maid of the Ares Palace maids, Olga, knocked on the door and entered. She had a thick stack of resumes in her arms. After entering, she said, "This is a brief introduction to the tutoring candidates. It has already been screened beforehand. At least, there is no need to doubt its credibility." Dake pointed at the table. "Put it there first. Has Diesel's seed been planted?" Olga smiled. "It has already been planted." "Then let's go take a look first." Dake stood up. Aurora reluctantly put down the catnip plants and followed him out the door. The three of them went downstairs and passed through a long corridor. Soon they arrived at the backyard. The first thing that came into view was a field of fresh flowers and lawns, which covered the entire courtyard. They passed through a small path in the garden. A gentle breeze carried the fragrance of the flowers. The sun was setting in the west. The afterglow of the setting sun shone down slowly. Their skin was golden. A golden-haired boy and a silver-haired girl strolled around. The beautiful maid walked in a gentle and graceful manner. As the scenery slowly unfolded, a specially cultivated circular piece of land appeared in front of them. It was humid. Diesel's seed had already sprouted a small sprout. 4-in-1 8000 plus, 82/233. The road to more chapters is long. 3 minutes have passed. Tickets here. Chapter 470. It's already sprouted? Dake's eyes were filled with amazement. I used a little trick. Olga lifted the hem of her skirt and carefully squatted down to observe the small sprout. She was 1.66 meters tall and had a pure and gentle appearance. She had a quiet and virtuous temperament and always had a faint smile on her face, which made people feel close to her. Diesel's seed can absorb people's wandering desires. Standing near it can make one's mind calm. When it grows into a towering tree, it might become a good place for sisters to go for a picnic. Dake nodded slightly and squatted down to observe the new life at close range. The name of the Mother Tree of Desire made it easy for people to associate it with the 7 deadly sins. Its leaves could be used to make a mind notebook, and its branches could be used to make a high-level mind bottle. If the bark was cut and the sap extracted, it could also be used to make a special potion that could make people recall their emotions. In short, it had many uses. Remember, https://mvipcanchu. VIP. Unfortunately, its materials were not suitable to be used to make magic elves. The creation of magic elven cards was closely related to one's thoughts and spirit. The various materials of the Mother Tree of Desire carried too many complicated thoughts, which would cause the magic elven cards to turn into a filthy paste during the creation process. Dark reached out and gently touched the sprout. Then he retracted his hand and softly said, "Since you were able to make it sprout in such a short period of time, you should have some understanding of how to grow it into a tree in 3 months, right?" Olga blinked at him. "That's a secret." "Dake, Sister Olga," Olga smiled. "The Duke will tell you." After looking at Diesel's seed, the three of them did not return immediately. Instead, they continued to walk slowly along the path in the garden. Olga began to talk about the different types of flowers and plants in the garden with great familiarity. Dake was not interested in these things before, but it was different now. He gradually realized that there were many treasures hidden in the garden in his backyard. If those treasures were processed, they could become rare materials for making magic potions. When the orange-red sun had completely set, Dake walked out of the garden and came to the pool. The fierce waterfall fell from the mountain wall and into the pool with a roar. It was a majestic sight. When the rare aquatic beasts in the pond sensed that someone was approaching, they all floated to the surface of the water and let out intimate cries. Dake led Aurora to a large rock and sat down. He recalled, "When I'm in a bad mood, I like to sit here. Seeing the waterfall fall from such a high place, it's like throwing all my pent-up frustrations to the ground. It's a very comfortable feeling." Aurora whispered, "You have times when you're in a bad mood?" Dark was a little surprised. "Of course." Aurora stuck out her tongue. In fact, she had always thought that Dark Diamond was a heartless person. From the things he had done in the past, one could tell a thing or two. But now that Dake had recovered his memories of his past life, he was naturally more mature. She turned her attention to the aquatic animals in the pool and suddenly exclaimed, "Isn't that a water dragon lizard?" Dake followed her gaze and saw a huge lizard coming out of the water. Its head was flat like a toad's, and its body was covered in dark green scales. Its forelimbs were spread out to the sides and its feet were webbed. Its tail was long and powerful with fins at the tip. This was the first time he had seen a water dragon lizard in the pool. He couldn't help but ask, "Sister Olga, is this a new one this year?" Ollie smiled and said, Yes. Its name is Water Treasure. The Duke saved it from the World Annihilation Dragon cult's laboratory after destroying it. World Annihilation Dragon cult? Dake was surprised. This cult's name is a bit strange. Olga said slowly. It's a cult of lunatics that wants to create a dragon that can destroy the world. They worship the ancient World Annihilation Dragon Glass. Oofed. Dake covered his mouth to stop himself from laughing. Why don't you say Godzilla? How about 500 grams of nuclear wastewater? However, the water dragon lizard's existence gave Dake some ideas. Water dragon lizards were a type of aquatic dragon. There were many different types, ranging from low star to high star. The water dragon lizard in the pool wasn't particularly high level. It should be a mid-level one. However, it seemed to be in good condition. Thinking about it, during this period of time in the Duke's mansion, it had grown fat. Meow. All of a sudden, the water dragon lizard let out a meow towards Olga, causing Dark and Aurora to be stunned again. Olga explained, Water Treasure's vocal cords were removed during an experiment and haven't been reconnected yet. That's why it can only meow like this. As she spoke, the small aquatic animals leaped out of the pool and scrambled to climb onto the water dragon lizard's flat and broad back. Some of the aquatic animals jumped up and down while others lay on its back, revealing their white and tender bellies to the sky. It was extremely cute. To be able to raise these ferocious aquatic animals like this, as expected of the Duke's residence, Aurora couldn't help but open her mouth in shock. On the other hand, Dark seemed to be deep in thought as he sized up those aquatic beasts, after which he asked, Has this water dragon lizard shed its skin? Olga said no. If the young master wants material, the residence has a simple blood crystal made from its blood. Dake asked, Has it changed its blood? Olga nodded. Its blood has been greatly contaminated. In order to save it, we've drained its blood 8 times. The new blood has gradually diluted the remaining toxins in its blood. Even so, there are still small contaminants in its blood. However, those contaminants won't be too much of an obstacle to the creation of a magic fairy. If everything goes well, it can even be expelled during the creation process. Dake searched for a while and suddenly said, So Mother brought it back to the residence with this in mind. Of course. Olga's smile grew wider. After all, the young master is already an archmage. When the sky had completely darkened, Dake and the other two returned to the residence. Yvette's work sometimes lasted until very late, so the residence's dinner time would be delayed. Dake and Aurora arrived at the dining room first, and discovered that there was a slightly shorter dining table near the original one. There were all kinds of chairs at the table, all of which were clearly custom-made. Not long after, his magic fairies were led into the dining room by the older female servants like primary school students. When they saw Dake sitting in the dining room, the originally well-behaved magic fairies suddenly became restless. A few even wanted to break away from the group and run to Dake's side. However, the Dilu beast at the very front only lightly clapped its hands, and the restlessness died down. The magic fairies did their best to control their impulses, and sat down at the new dining table one by one. Dake propped up his chin and smiled as he watched their performance. The sadness of the day gradually receded. Not long after, the female servants pushed the dining cart in one by one. They first served some cut fruit platters, then taught the magic fairies how to use the table knives and forks. The dining room gradually became busy, and the magic fairies' meows were incessant. Of course, some of the magic fairies without hands could only watch. Some felt lucky, while others felt a little disappointed. After a female servant brought in a cup of goat's milk, Dake shifted his attention to the new newspaper. In these 2 days, the situation in the capital was unpredictable, and the movements of the Holy Church were becoming more frequent. The execution plan against the Demon King, which was originally suppressed, seemed to be put on the agenda again. The newspaper once again began to publicize the results of the Holy Church's scholar named Abel Yerkes. Previously, someone in the newspaper said that he had researched a way to completely kill the Demon King after more than 10 years. Aurora sat on the side. She had nothing to do, so she copied Dake and picked up the newspaper to read. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the adults arrived at the same time. Claire, Yvette, Susanna. The three of them sat at the other end of the table, and the discussion in their mouths didn't stop. Dake put down the newspaper and listened to their conversation. He gradually understood their topic at this time. They were also discussing matters related to the Holy Church. Has it been settled? Dake paused for a while, and suddenly interrupted. Yvette didn't feel disgusted by his interruption. Instead, she smiled and said, "It's generally settled. The Holy Church will probably carry out a public execution of the Demon King in July. They kept their secret very well. Even the people inside the Holy Church believed that Abel Yerkes had really figured out a way to completely kill the Demon King. If we didn't already know, I'm afraid we would be skeptical." Claire shook her head and said, "The Holy Church is still so good at fooling people." Among the three adults, Yvette and Claire didn't show much worry about the Demon King. Only City Lord Susanna Montefiore was worried from the moment she entered the door. She looked like she couldn't eat. After answering Dake's question, Yvette turned to her and said, "Don't worry too much. Just prepare in advance. Even if there's a problem, I'll let Elisha hold up the flag and send troops to the Freedom City in the name of humanitarianism to help you resist the possible crisis. This is also a win-win situation for Elisha." City Lord Montefiore sighed slightly. "If it's possible, I still hope that the hybrids can protect their homeland. The City of Freedom is both our hope and our dignity. But if it's really not feasible, I'll ask for help." "That's good," Yvette said with relief. She knew her comrade's personality very well, but it seemed that she had changed in the past 10 years after becoming a city lord. City Lord Montefiore said again, "Now that things have come to this, it seems that I have to return to the city in advance. No matter if the Demon King is resurrected or executed, this kind of thing will cause the demon remnants to become more active. We're in the demon's original territory, and the Freedom City is full of people. It's very likely that they'll be the first to target us." "Mother, you're going back?" Aurora had been listening quietly and couldn't help but ask. City Lord Montefiore nodded slightly. "About 3 days. After I confirm that the execution ceremony will really take place, I'll go back. As for you, you can continue to stay at your Aunt Diming's house. I know you won't make me worry, right?" Aurora answered, but she was obviously very depressed. Yvette comforted her. "Little Aurora, just treat this as your home. If you miss home, you can send a letter." Aurora nodded. "Thank you, Auntie." City Lord Montefiore sighed silently, but didn't say anything else. Leaving Aurora in the Duke's mansion was a decision she made after careful consideration. On one hand, she wasn't a magus and couldn't give Aurora the education she deserved. On the other hand, the Freedom City was about to face more and more dangers. Aurora looked soft and weak, but sometimes she would do things that made her very worried. Because of this precedent, she really didn't dare to leave her in the Freedom City. Aurora was her most important treasure. Her priority was even higher than the Freedom City. After everyone had arrived, the maids quickly began to serve the delicacies. The three adults didn't talk about official matters anymore. Instead, under Yvette's lead, they excitedly asked about Dake and Aurora's itinerary for the day. Of course, there was nothing to be shy about. Dake told them about the itinerary for the day. It was clearly a rather boring itinerary for him, but for some reason, Yvette listened with great interest. After Dake finished, she suddenly said with a smile, "It seems that little Aurora has been paying attention to your big brother Dake for a long time, right?" Dake clearly didn't mention that the places he passed by were places where he did bad things, but Yvette saw through it at a glance. Her question caught Aurora off guard. She was so embarrassed that she almost crawled under the table. City Lord Montefiore looked at this scene, and suddenly realized that even if she did indeed propose to cancel the engagement, it was very likely that it wouldn't go smoothly. Her family's little moon's life had long been filled with Dake Diming's imprint. This late realization made her shake her head continuously. But who could she blame for this? Who told her to not keep her mouth shut and leak the engagement? After dinner, perhaps because she heard about Dake's magic chess deeds, Yvette suddenly had the interest to play chess. She had the head maid, Madame Jasmine, go to the warehouse and take out a magic chess set that had been sealed for a long time. Although the chess pieces of this magic chess set were far less exquisite than the latest chess pieces, and the types of chess pieces were also very different. But those who understood the modern magic chess set could quickly grasp the way to play chess as long as they were slightly familiar with it. Dake played chess with Yvette for the first time. There was no surprise. He was defeated so badly that he threw away his armor. Yvette always showed her stupid side in front of him. He almost forgot that she was also a Valkyrie who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Even if she wasn't good at commanding, she never pulled her legs when she was needed to command. All kinds of tactics and strategies were easily grasped. With Dake's chess skills, he could only bully people of the same generation. But once he encountered these true veterans, he didn't even have the right to move a finger. The painful defeat aroused his fighting spirit. The second game was quickly set up. But Dake couldn't turn the tables and lost again. Claire couldn't stop smiling as she watched him lose again and again. Dake glared at her, and immediately started the third game. The scene in the Star Cluster building during the day was now playing out in reverse. Yvette wanted to go easy on him, but Dake exposed her on the spot, so she could only continue. Dake absorbed the experience of failure, and his chess skills gradually increased. Finally, after more than 10 games, he turned the tables with a stroke of genius and successfully obtained his first Pyrrhic victory. Then, without waiting for Yvette to say next game, he decisively ended the game. It's already so late? Mom, I'm going to sleep. Good night. He won for a day. After returning to his bedroom, Dake called out the system interface and smiled as he looked at Pride, which had increased a little, and drew 5 points. Among the 7 deadly sins, pride was indeed the safest. It was easy to increase and easy to control. He just went out for a walk and played chess with others for a while, and it increased easily. Pride, greed, and bliss. He looked at bliss. After returning home for a few days, bliss, which had been drained to only 80 points, had increased to 89 points. Seeing that it would reach the standard line of 90 points, Dake could only shake his head. It's not that I, Dake Dimming, am not working hard, but there are too many temptations at home. But since greed isn't working, the return of bliss Dragon King might be able to alleviate the resource crisis. After seriously reflecting, Dake washed up, put on a face mask, and crawled under his bed to read Journey Around the World for a while before falling asleep. The 4th day back home. June 7th, Thursday. Since he had no schedule today, Dake took out the tutoring resume that he forgot last night and carefully checked it after breakfast. There were a total of 16 tutors who passed the basic screening. 6 of them were males and 10 were females. Since most of the family members were females, Dake was more inclined towards female tutoring. Therefore, he first separated the males and females, then picked up the information of the 6 male candidates and carefully looked through them. With the idea of filtering them out, Dake's gaze became a lot stricter. Even so, he still only filtered out 5 male candidates. Looking at the last male candidate's information, Dake could not help but fall into deep thought. He never would have thought that a sage would apply for the tutoring position. The developer of the Silence card. Silent Sage. Buckner Cyrus. He was an 83-year-old scholar. Even though Cyrus was one of those who kept a low profile in the academic circle of sages, the development of the Silence card still made him famous. However, Cyrus was a classic example of a well-prepared person. He only understood the principles when he was in his 60s. Now that he was out of control, it only took him a few years to become a true sage. A sage, like him, applying for the tutoring position was definitely not for money or connections. He might not even care about the reputation. Did he apply because he knew that he would be teaching a group of magical elves? Dake could not help but think. When Olga posted the recruitment, of course, she did not specify who she would be teaching. She only specified that she would be teaching a group of children with almost zero foundation, and stated that they must complete basic education within 3 months. Therefore, after the resume review, there would be an interview, and after the interview, there would be an internship test. Only after passing the internship test would one be officially employed. But when it came to the children in the Duke's mansion, if the circle was well informed, it was actually possible to deduce who the tutors would be. Let's put it aside for now. Since Olga thinks that this old sage can be trusted, I'll consult him later. After all, there were a total of 18 magical elves that needed to be taught. Dake intended to hire more than one tutor, so he had to leave a few spots open for interviews. Then he began to check the remaining 10 female applicants. Debbie Giles, a fresh graduate of the Shungmalian Academy? Is she a 6th grade senior? Just the first one surprised Dake. He was suddenly interested and carefully looked through it. Graduated from the House of Fools. Her final exam results were average. Graduation evaluation is good. The Shungmalian Academy's graduation evaluation only had 3 grades: pass, good, and excellent. The so-called good grade was actually very good. After all, those who did not pass would not be able to graduate. Passing was considered average, and excellent was naturally above average. The excellent grade was very strict, and it was an achievement that only a few people could achieve. Of course, anyone who successfully graduated from the Shungmalian Academy, even if they only passed, was good enough to teach the magical elves. Moreover, she was young enough and had drive. After getting into the Duke's mansion, it would be able to gild her resume with a layer of gold. If the magical elves' learning speed was fast enough, she could even teach them some basics related to magic. These were her advantages. As for her personality and character, it could only be seen through an interview. Let's put it aside for now. After Dake finished reading, he put her resume aside. They were all students in the same school, so he naturally had some inclination towards this fresh graduate senior. Then he picked up the second female applicant's information. Monica Cook, why does she look a little familiar? The middle-aged woman in the photo wore glasses and had a serious expression. Dake couldn't help but try to recall. But he didn't stop to check. Soon, he found the reason for the familiarity from the middle-aged woman's resume. It's actually the tutor of the 2 princesses. Dake couldn't help but smile bitterly. After the 2 little princesses received the Shungmalian Academy's admission invitation, they were indeed liberated. In the next 3 months, they also received the princesses' permission to play to their heart's content. So this Miss Cook naturally lost her job. To be able to become the tutor of the little princesses, there was naturally no need to worry about Miss Cook's character and standard. What Dake was more worried about was whether she was as strict as she looked. After all, the results of her education were right in front of him, and the 2 little princesses really weren't very well behaved. To be able to teach the 2 little princesses. But I can't blame her for this, and I've already prepared a supervising maid for each of them, so I shouldn't have to worry about this problem. In this case, it's not a problem even if Ms. Cook is directly hired. Well, let's put it aside first. So, after Dake finished reading Monica Cook's information, he put it together with the previous 2. Then, he looked at the information of the 3rd female applicant. Dake opened the information and closed it after a glance. Reason: not pleasing to the eye. The next few applicants all had their own advantages, but their shortcomings were also more obvious. It wasn't until the 7th female applicant that Dake became more interested. Let me see, the former director of the Royal Botanic Garden? The photo was of a kind-looking old lady. The reason for her dismissal from the Royal Botanic Garden was that she was too old. In other words, she retired normally. And every month, she received half of her previous retirement salary. For such an old lady, retirement and leisure should be the life that belonged to her for the rest of her life. But obviously, she didn't want to end it like this. Batty Plant, 61 years old, has some understanding of grass magic. Well, I have to see how her physical and mental state is. Next one. Although the 8th and 9th female applicants were not bad, in front of the selected ones, they were clearly not good enough. After filtering them out, Dake picked up the last piece of information. This time, the applicant had once again surprised him, even to the point of being extremely surprised. Camilla? What is she doing here again? Dake didn't hesitate to put Silver Wolf Knight's information on the not qualified side. But after a while he picked up the information again, looking a bit embarrassed. Silver Wolf Knight, Camilla, the wife of Viscount Greatabale, Deanna's mother and Aurora's aunt. If she wasn't here to join in the fun, then her purpose of applying for the tutoring job was very obvious. She probably wants a legitimate reason to enter the Duke's mansion. Fine, let's see what she can teach first. Thus, the first resume review was over. Dake selected a total of 5 applicants. The 5 candidates were Sadface 1, Silent Sage, Buckner Sellers 2, Shingmalian graduate, Debbie Giles 3, former tutor of the 2 princesses, Monica Cook 4, former director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Batty Plant 5, Silver Wolf Knight Camilla. After sorting out the rest of the information, Dake stacked the information of the 5 candidates together and called a maid. Call Olga here. Olga quickly came over. Dake placed the information of the 5 candidates in front of him and said, "Tell me about these 5 people." Written information was naturally not as comprehensive as oral information. Olga picked up the 5 documents and flipped through them. She then listed the specific information of the 5 candidates and the reasons she guessed for applying for the job. It was the same as what Dake thought. Dake asked, "How trustworthy is this Silent Sage?" Olga smiled and said, "Young master, you might not know this. This Silent Sage is Claire Kate's teacher. Although it's not an official master-disciple relationship, there is a master-disciple relationship." Is that so? Dake suddenly realized. Since a tutor was hired, the intelligence of the magic elves would naturally be exposed. Whether or not the Silent Sage came about didn't make much of a difference. Dake didn't particularly care. As long as the magic card of these magic elves was in his hands, others wouldn't be able to find out the source. On the other hand, he was actually happy that the Silent Sage could research other results from the intelligence of the magic elves, because he would obviously be the one benefiting. After the relationship between the Silent Sage and Claire was exposed, Dake's impression of him increased greatly. "Then that's it. Arrange for the interview tomorrow." "Yes, young master." Olga put away the documents and quickly left. After finalizing the interview candidates, Dake had nothing to do, so he called Aurora and prepared to go to the back of the mountain for a stroll. When Aurora heard that they were going to the back of the mountain, she changed her dress into trousers. After Dake ate a few candies, he also brought all the magic elves along and prepared to have a quick picnic. Perhaps because she saw his intention to go to the back of the mountain, Lion Katrina actually appeared in front of the waterfall pool. Dake looked at the picnic equipment she displayed and reluctantly agreed to go with her. It was the first time the magic elves entered such boundless nature, and they stayed in the house for 2 whole days. Naturally, they were overjoyed and happy. Aurora also rarely stepped into such an environment, so she only felt that it was full of novelty everywhere. There were many monsters outside the City of Freedom, and it was very dangerous. She wasn't allowed to leave the city, but what she didn't know was that the back of the Duke's mansion was also very dangerous. But with Katrina, the force she released was like an animal repellent, scaring away all the monsters that tried to get close. Only a few stupid beasts accidentally entered, but they were all casually slaughtered by Katrina. She even picked 1 or 2 edible ones among them. When Dake arrived at the tree house in the back of the mountain, it was already close to noon. He was surprised to find that the wooden house on the tree was still there, and it was quite clean. Katrina revealed a rare smile. The old butler buried a treasure under the tree, and said that you can dig it out whenever you don't want this wooden house anymore. Then, she waved at the huge tree that carried the wooden house, and the huge tree that had been motionless suddenly moved. As the leaves rustled, the huge tree extended a branch and patted Katrina's hand like a puppy. Dake was instantly stupefied. He asked, "Was this tree demonized later, or was it a magic tree from the beginning?" Katrina smiled and said, "It was from the beginning, but at that time, it wasn't as obedient as it is now." "Okay, I knew it." Dake shook his head. It wasn't until Aurora asked out of curiosity that he told her about his childhood. Then they began to roast meat under the tree. Katrina's cooking was surprisingly good, and she brought a lot of spices. Aurora learned from her and could actually eat a lot too. Dake narrowed his eyes with a smile and let Meow Meow do it. Their mouths were full of grease from the picnic. Dake had planned to take a nap in the wooden house, but Katrina immediately told him, "Chris is back. 4 in 1 8000 plus, 84/233. She's in good shape today. There might be more at night, around midnight." Chapter 471. Chris Dimong. She was the head maid of the Scorpio Palace maid squad, and one of the 6 head maids who had been given the name Dimong. You're back already? I thought it would be a bit later. Dake yawned lazily. His days in the Duke's mansion had been too comfortable, so much so that he couldn't muster up any energy. Thinking about it this way, Yvette's summer tutoring seemed like a good idea. At least it would allow him to maintain the good habit of exercising self-restraint. Otherwise, sloth, gluttony, 20, and so on might skyrocket. Seeing that he was doubtful, Trina reached into her pocket and took out a magic card that emitted a faint golden light. She waved it in front of him and said, "The 12 pieces of the golden holy armor can sense each other. The closer the distance, the clearer the connection. She has already returned to the mansion. So that's how it is." Dake nodded slightly and said decisively, "Then let's go back." He was also very interested in the forest protector he had encountered in the magic car. Even though the magic elves wanted to continue, they still hurried back. Not long after, the group passed through the back mountain and returned to the backyard of the Duke's mansion. A maid was already waiting by the pond and immediately welcomed them. Dake looked at her and said, "Speak." "Yes, young master." The maid immediately said, "Head maid Chris has returned. The Duke is waiting for you in the mansion." "Understood." Dake nodded at her. After that, he didn't immediately head to the mansion. Instead, he pointed at the magic elves and said to Aurora, "Can you please accompany them for a while?" Aurora nodded obediently and said, "Yes." "That's good." Dake smiled brightly. Then he found the dream demon from the magic elves and said, "Dream demon, come with me." "Mimi." The dream demon let out a cheerful cry and immediately flew over. At this moment, the little demon beast didn't want to fall behind and also flew onto Dake's shoulder. Dake patted its paw and didn't say anything. Then he quickly followed Trina to the mansion. Inside the mansion, Arvette and Claire were chatting leisurely. City Lord Montierfali was also standing beside them. When Dake's figure entered her line of sight, Yvette waved at him and said, "You're back so soon?" Dake nodded. "Where's Chris?" "Come with me." Yvette glanced at the dream demon floating around Dake, then led the way into the mansion and left through the back door. After making a few more turns, she casually patted the air, and a door appeared out of thin air. "Let's go." Yvette pushed open the door and stepped in. Dake knew that there was a basement in the Duke's mansion, but he didn't know how to get in until today. The stairs leading down were clean and flat, and the magic lamps on the walls automatically lit up the underground passage. It didn't give off the eerie feeling that he had imagined. "What's down there?" Dake asked curiously. Yvette's lips curled. "Cold storage." "Cold storage?" Dake was shocked. "I thought. You thought it was a dungeon?" Yvette couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. "How could I set up a dungeon in my own home?" Dake said quietly, "That's true." However, City Lord Montierfali also had an awkward expression on her face, so he didn't feel isolated. Anyone who entered here wouldn't think that it was just a cold storage. The deeper they went, the lower the temperature. Because it was summer, Dake even felt a slight chill. He subconsciously moved closer to City Lord Montierfali. Sure enough, it wasn't that cold. When Yvette noticed this, she continued to descend. After walking down the stairs, they finally arrived in front of another door. Yvette pressed her hand on the door and injected magic, and the door slowly opened. In the blink of an eye, a wave of extremely cold air rushed over. However, the hot wind that followed immediately after formed a flowing barrier, blocking the cold air outside. City Lord Montierfali smiled at Dake and let him continue forward. Dake accepted her kindness and stepped through the door. Then he immediately discovered that there were a large number of magical beasts sealed in ice on both sides of the cold storage like freezers. This was different from the cold storage he had imagined. As he walked forward, more and more magical beasts entered his field of vision. None of them had any injuries on the outside, and their corpses were extremely well preserved. Even Dake couldn't be sure if those were corpses or not. It can't be a gene bank made to ensure species diversity, right? However, just as Dake was thinking this, Yvette said, "I captured them myself." Yvette said slowly, "These magical beasts were all captured by me, and each of them is a commander. They are not dead, but their souls and bodies are all frozen. Unless the ice used to seal them all melts, it is impossible for them to wake up. City Lord Montierfolly asked curiously, "What's the point of doing such a troublesome thing?" Yvette shook her head and said, "We all know that magical beasts were originally created by the demons after they demonized wild beasts. Now that the demons are almost extinct, although the magical beasts don't show any signs of decreasing on a large scale for the time being. In fact, many magical beast species are already endangered. This is actually very fatal for archmages who need specific magical beast materials to complete their magic refining. That's why I built this cold storage to capture and preserve some of the rare magical beasts that are on the brink of extinction. It won't cause the magic cards that need them to become extinct. It's really a gene bank." While Dake was astonished, he couldn't help but feel in awe of Yvette's foresight. As magic technology became more advanced, the power of archmages would become stronger. The originally ferocious and terrifying magical beasts would gradually become a vulnerable group and become targets for slaughter. In the current era where magic technology was exploding, it was completely impossible to expect the archmages to have the concept of sustainable development. In fact, these signs had already begun to appear. Some materials that weren't rare in the past were now priceless and couldn't be bought at all. It was only in the Shungmalian, which had a special underground city, that almost all the materials could be bought. The underground cities in the outside world didn't have the Shungmalian refresh mechanism. They walked along the corridor. After walking for a while, Yvelette slowed down. Dake also saw Chris standing in front of the road. After Chris came back from a long trip, there wasn't a trace of fatigue on her face. It was as if it was a piece of cake for her. Her petite body, which didn't match her age, silently emitted a huge force that radiated outward like a spider web. It wasn't until a few people arrived that she instantly restrained herself. Suddenly, her entire sense of existence suddenly disappeared, as if she had disappeared without a trace. "Chris, where is he?" Yvette broke the silence. Chris didn't move inside. In the compartment that was originally used to seal magical beasts, a person was curled up with his entire body bound. The cold air from all around turned into a thick fog, forming layers of frost on his face. If he had been any later, he would have been frozen into an ice cube like those magical beasts. Dake quickly walked outside and carefully looked for a while before asking the dream demon, "Is it this person?" The dream demon immediately went inside and circled around the person. When she flew back, she called out loudly, "Mimi." "Looks like it is." Dake couldn't help but feel admiration. In a situation where there was so little information, Chris was actually able to accurately capture a powerful magus in such a short time. It was truly awe-inspiring. However, Yvette and Chris seemed to be used to it. Yvette only praised, "Well done, tell us about this person's background." Chris opened her mouth and said, "It's the Church of Knowledge." "Church of Knowledge?" Yvette couldn't help but frown. "That's not an evil sect, right?" Chris nodded slightly. Seeing this, Dake couldn't help but wonder. "Wait, what kind of sect is the Church of Knowledge?" Claire continued, "It's a sect that deifies knowledge and purely believes in knowledge. They started about 3 years ago, and their core members are all relatively experienced magi. There are also magi among them. In the past 3 years, they haven't shown any signs of harm. They even set up schools in remote villages to teach the poor children the corresponding basic knowledge for free. Thus, even the Holy Church can't classify them as heretics. So it's a sect like that." Dake couldn't help but frown, instinctively sensing how difficult this sect was to deal with. Claire made a for sign in front of her chest and said, "This is their prayer sign. Because it's similar to the strokes of a cross, it's harder to recognize." Dake remembered this feature and then wondered, "Then how did Chris find him?" Chris turned to look at him and said, "I first went to Grey Mist Forest as you said and found that forest ranger. But he didn't know anything, so." Dake asked curiously, "So?" Chris couldn't help but smile. "So I knocked him out." "Dake." Chris pointed at her chest and said, "My Scorpio armor can shoot poisonous needles. One of the needles can control a person's mind. After he fainted, he lost the ability to resist. I used the needle to stab his temple and temporarily turned him into a puppet, making him spill everything. Dark couldn't help but feel a chill as he listened to Chris's tireless explanation. After the forest ranger was controlled by the needle, he told her everything that happened in the past few days, no matter how big or small. Using this as a basis, Chris tallied up all the suspicious points and analyzed them in detail. In the end, she filtered out a total of 13 suspicious people. After that, she led the Scorpio Palace maid squad to spread out and search for traces of the 13 suspicious people. Finally, after many rounds of screening, she narrowed down the suspects to only one. Then Chris directly made her move. She didn't wait until nightfall. In fact, she didn't even wait until noon when the sun was shining brightly. She directly drilled out of that person's shadow and stabbed the needle into the back of his neck at a speed that he couldn't react to at all. The poison that erupted in an instant made that person unable to even realize that it was happening next to him. He instantly went limp and fell to the ground. Then another maid put on a binding cloth used to confine magic power on him. Chris once again used the terrifying poison needle that could control a person's mind, making that person blurt out all his thoughts. The entire technique was actually not that complicated, but the terrifying part was the Scorpio Palace maid's ability to move and Chris's poison needle. In front of that kind of poison needle, if the corresponding protective measures were not set up beforehand, there would be no secrets to speak of. This was completely different from the methods of torture. It was another kind of terror. But thinking about it carefully, since this was the unique killing move of the Scorpio Saint armor, one of the 12 gold Saint armors, it was normal. If it didn't have this level of killing move, it wouldn't be worthy of the name Gold Saint armor. After Dake accepted this reality, he asked again. If that's the case, there shouldn't be a need for further interrogation. So what's the purpose of his actions? But when he asked, he suddenly noticed a strange flash in Chris's eyes. This gave him a bad premonition. Chris immediately said, "This person's name is Ignaz Cooper. He's a magus, but he's not from the academy. He's been in the Church of Knowledge for 6 years. He's one of the original members of this church." Wait, Dake interrupted. So this Church of Knowledge has actually been established for 6 years. It's like this, Chris said. This isn't a secret. They established the church 6 years ago. At first, it was mainly for the exchange of knowledge. Then it gradually grew stronger and started its activities 3 years ago. In the Church of Knowledge, there's no leader. There are only 13 elders, and all decisions are made by these 13 elders. And this Mr. Ignatzu Cooper is the direct disciple of one of the elders. Then his position is quite high? Dake said. Chris nodded. Yes, it's not bad. Otherwise, the Church of Knowledge wouldn't have given that mission to him. Dake asked, what mission? At this point, Chris had a strange look in her eyes again. But she could not help curling up the corners of her mouth. Obviously, she wanted to laugh. After 6 years of development, the Church of Knowledge probably felt that the sect was not focused enough and needed a spiritual leader, so they planned to promote a divine child. Dake hesitated. A son of God? Chris nodded. Yes, a son of God. She then said. Each of the 13 elders would nominate a candidate for a son of God. Then one of the 13 candidates would be chosen, and finally be elected as the true son of God. And this Mr. Ignaz Cooper's teacher took a fancy to young Master. It's just that after Ignaz Cooper learned about young Master, he became a little greedy. 2 and 1 4000 plus 86/233. Chapter 472. Was he slightly greedy? Dake turned his head to look at Ignatzu Cooper in the cubicle, and recalled the details of the dream in the magic car. Perhaps Ignatzu was indeed only slightly greedy. But so what? From the moment he decided to make a move, everything could no longer be settled peacefully. As for the matter of electing Dake as a candidate for the Son of God, that was even more laughable. Who gave them the confidence to tempt a duke's son to join a religion that had only been established for less than 6 years? Did they really think that the duke's son was an underage child? Oh, it seemed so. Dake shook his head. Since the Church of Knowledge had no ill intentions, and what happened afterwards was merely Ignatzu Cooper's personal actions, then there was no need to investigate too deeply. It was enough to just give Ignatzu Cooper the punishment he deserved. Remember the URL. MVIP can't you? VIP. The Duke's residents also had to take care of their own reputation and do everything reasonably. Usually they wouldn't do unreasonable things, unless it was an unusual occasion. As for pushing him to the court for trial, considering that this matter was not suitable to be revealed publicly, so be it. Dake said to Chris, "Then I'll leave this guy's matter to you." Chris asked curiously, "Aren't you going to chat with him?" Dake shook his head. No. There was no need. He was just an insignificant person. Right, how did his teacher choose me? Before he left, Dake suddenly thought of something and asked. Chris said slowly, "It seems that he saw young master's brilliant performance at the Easter Duel Festival held by the Shungmalian Academy, and discovered that young master's magic fairy had an intelligence level of over 3.0. This kind of technology is something that a magus seeks for their entire lives. Moreover, they worship the incarnation of knowledge, and are extremely eager for this kind of method that can bestow intelligence. Young master, who has such a method, naturally fits their definition of a son of God." Chris continued, "And from what I see, the other 12 elders probably won't be able to find a candidate who fits the definition of a son of God better than young master. If young master wants to, I'm afraid that becoming the spiritual leader of this church of knowledge is a sure thing." "I see." Dake thought for a moment and said, "Then let them know that I'm not willing. I hope they can understand my difficulties." Chris smiled. "No problem." Since even Dake had no intention of staying, Yvette naturally wouldn't stay in the cold storage. She was very relieved to leave the rest to Chris to handle. As for the so-called Church of Knowledge, because they had indeed done things that benefited the people, no matter which force it was, they had turned a blind eye to them. But since they had crossed that line themselves, they couldn't blame them for being merciless. Although Yvette was very satisfied with her baby's peaceful attitude, she would not give up just like that. Not long after, the four of them returned to the ground. Dake then asked casually, "Since everyone thinks that the Church of Knowledge's move to set up schools is a good thing for the people, why don't we do it ourselves?" Yvette looked at him with some surprise, then couldn't help but grab her baby's arm and hug it. She said happily, "Of course, it's because the Church of Light has already taken on some of the responsibilities in this area. Now every church in the kingdom is teaching people how to read and write. And there's no charge. They just need the people to go to the church every Sunday to worship." Dake asked curiously, "Are they using this to gather believers?" Yvette nodded. "This is indeed one of the subtle influences. After all, it's getting harder and harder to bluff people now. Only by really doing something can people believe and trust you." Dake said, "But as far as I know, the Church of Light only teaches the most basic reading and writing, right? At most, they teach some simple arithmetic. That can't be called a school." "It's like this," Yvette said. "There are many things that need to be considered in order to make education universal. Although we all know that this is beneficial to the people and can drive the overall development, we also know that once there are more and more smart people, there will be problems with the concentration of power. Therefore, when it comes to universal education, we must have great courage. As an individual, the Church of Knowledge can do that. But as a government, on the one hand, we will seize the territory of the Church of Light. On the other hand, we will inevitably be opposed by the stubborn nobles. But the development of the era is moving forward at high speed. If we want to ride the wind and break the waves of this era, we must have the ability to see the future. On my side, I have always been in favor of setting up schools and making education universal. Once it starts, the Dimming family will also support it. But I hope that Elisha will be the one to bring it up." Speaking of this, Yvellette's concern for Elisa was once again mixed with concern. What a worrisome person. Dake's expression was gentle, and he leaned closer to Yvette. Making education universal was a big deal. Yvette already had an idea. The first princess had most likely considered this as well. But if she wanted to carry it out, she needed more than just courage. Once she succeeded, she would obtain a victory in the fight for inheritance. But if she failed, She might completely withdraw from this fight. Times were changing, and the road ahead was uncertain. No one could easily dispel the clouds and make a choice. That night, Dake continued to draw 5 points of pride, and ushered in the day of the interview. At 8:30 in the morning, Dake had already sat down in the guest room on the first floor. Beside him sat Yvette and the Dilu Beast, and on the other side was Claire. Ollie and Trina stood behind Dake, one on the left and one on the right. City Lord Montefiore was not here. The 3 people and 1 beast behind the long table chatted while drinking tea. Yvette and Claire pushed aside their official duties and specially came to participate in this interview. Naturally, they wanted to choose the most suitable candidate. As for the Dilu Beast, it was the representative of the magic elves. At the same time, Dake also wanted to observe the reactions of the candidates through its existence. I didn't expect Teacher Buckner Cyrus to also come for the interview. Claire flipped through the information and was a little surprised. His intentions are too obvious. Yvette shook her head slightly. She did not think highly of the silent sage. Teacher. Claire thought for a moment and said, he's a true scholar who is simply obsessed with magic research, but that was a long time ago. I don't know how he's doing now. In comparison, I think more highly of the tutor of the 2 little princesses, Ms. Monique Cook. Yvette could not help but smile. Indeed, not only does she have rich teaching experience, but she's also serious and likes children very much. I don't think there's a better candidate than her. Claire was full of agreement. Then she grabbed Camilla's information and mocked. On the contrary, I have no idea what Camilla is doing here. Is she not afraid that her husband will be completely tied to our ship? Perhaps we can understand it from another perspective. Yvette said, she came for the interview to show this attitude to the outside world. Dake looked at the 2 adults talking and could not help but be curious. This Aunt Camilla, why can't she come for Aurora? She wants to, but she's in the family so it's not up to her. Claire said, she must have her family's considerations for making such a decision. In fact, your birthday banquet has already changed the situation in the royal capital slightly. At this point, both Claire and Yvette could not help but smile. As the saying goes, an unintentionally planted willow grows a shade. As the information about the people at Dake's birthday banquet leaked out, especially when the Great Bayer family and Flotty family still attended the private tea party at the Duke's mansion after the banquet, some of the initial guesses were confirmed. In just these few days, many people who worked with the Great Bayer family tried to inquire about the situation. Even though Great Bayer said that he only brought his daughter to a classmate's birthday banquet. However, this made people think in the wrong direction. Some people even directly pointed out that he had the intention of forming a marriage alliance with the Duke's mansion. Even the elders in the family called him over and asked him in detail. Some of the elders who were not involved in politics did not care much about this matter at first, but since the topic was led to the marriage alliance, the degree of their concern instantly skyrocketed. Viscount Great Bayer was starting to feel overwhelmed. It was also fortunate that the relationship between Viscount Camilla and Castellan Montefiore was not publicized. Otherwise, he would have encountered even more troubles. In short, in these few days, everyone in the Great Bayer family knew that the troublesome son of the Valkyrie had obtained the first place in the first grade of the Shungmalian Academy. He was no longer the spoiled and incompetent boy from before. Many people who were close to Deanna would tease her whenever they met Deanna. Then, she would chase after them out of humiliation. In the Great Bayer family, there was a lot of joy in the atmosphere. In short, the troubles and worries belonged to the Viscount and his wife. Everyone else lived their lives as usual. In the Flotty family, what Viscount Flotty and his wife were worried about did not happen. The matter had just started to ferment. Most of the attention was still focused on the Great Bayer family. The Flotty family was not affected too much. However, the night before, Viscount Flotty received a rare invitation to a tea party. This made her happy and worried at the same time. In order to relieve her worries, the husband and wife were like squirrels. They asked people to search for books related to magical engineering, and piled them up at home. They didn't have anything but money. Viscount Flotty even started to plan to find a tutor for Luosi. However, It was not easy to find a tutor for a qualified magister. They did not have the means to do so, so they were very troubled. This information, no matter how big or small, was sent to Arvette's office without exception. Arvette and Claire discussed the current situation. They both felt that this was beneficial to the Duke's mansion, but it was not suitable to take the initiative. It was best to wait and see. While they were chatting, several people started to arrive outside the Duke's mansion one after another. The first candidate to arrive was a fresh graduate of the Shungmalian Academy, Debbie Giles. This young magister, who was only 18 years old, wore a magic robe and had light makeup on her face. It was obvious that she attached great importance to this interview. This was an opportunity for her. She wanted to seize it. After Debbie Giles, the silent sage, Buckner Cyrus also slowly came down from a carriage. The 83-year-old silent sage was using magic potions to recuperate his body. However, the traces of time still left deep marks on his body. His back was hunched, and he leaned on a walking stick. The wrinkles on his face were deep and weathered. A maid waiting at the door immediately came forward and helped him into the mansion. Then the 61-year-old former director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Barty Plant, also came down from a carriage that slowly drove over. Lady Plant, who was 20 years older than the silent sage, was still very healthy. However, there was a natural arrogance between her brows. After she was also invited into the mansion, Monica Cook, the former tutor of the two little princesses, arrived late. Last was the Silver Wolf Knight Camilla. Camilla wore casual clothes and openly entered the Duke's mansion without hiding anything. It was obvious that she had reached a consensus with her family in this short period of time. For example, a marriage alliance? In the entire royal city, at least for now, there was no one more suitable than Dake Dimung for their family's pearls. The only problem was that Dake's strength was slightly low. This didn't fit the Great Bayer family's general aesthetic. In the guest room, the head maid, Jasmine, walked in and whispered a few words. Yvette said, "Is everyone here? Where's Camilla?" Jasmine nodded and said, "Everyone is here. Madame Camilla is also here." Yvette nodded and turned to Dake, who was sitting on the main seat, and asked, "Who will go first?" Dake lightly tapped the table with his finger and said, "First come, first served." Jasmine immediately said, "That would be Miss Debbie Giles. Next would be Sage Buckner Cyrus." Dake raised his head and said, "Then let that senior go first." Jasmine said, "Yes, young master." After she finished speaking, Jasmine left the guest room. The few people in the guest room adjusted their expressions and waited for the interviewee. About 3 minutes later, Debbie Giles was led into the room by Jasmine. There was a chair in the middle of the guest room. Jasmine smiled and said, "Please sit." Debbie Giles sat down in a somewhat reserved manner and faced the 4 judges. She couldn't help but look at the only non-human among the 4 judges. However, the impression in her mind immediately made her recall that the white cat had appeared in the duel before. It was Dake Dimung's magic guide fairy. Why would a magic guide fairy be a judge? Debbie Giles couldn't help but think. Even if Junior Dimung's magic guide fairy has extremely high intelligence, it can't be a judge in this situation, right? This unexpected situation made her lose her composure. And this loss of composure was immediately noticed by Dake and the others. Debbie Giles, a fresh graduate from the Shungmalian Academy. Dake seriously sized up this senior and said, "Let's start with a self-introduction." Okay. Debbie Giles immediately began to introduce herself. This introduction was clearly more concise and clear than the information on paper. It was also more clear-cut. At least in terms of self-introduction, she was flawless. Dake was quite satisfied and continued to ask, "Giles, tell me, as an official archmage who graduated from the Shungmalian Academy, why would you want to apply for a job here?" Debbie Giles let out a sigh of relief and immediately said, "I am a student of the Fool's Academy. When I graduated, I didn't have much of a foundation. I need to rely on my own hard work to continue accumulating capital. Only then can I walk further on the path of an archmage. Moreover, I have personally seen Junior Dimung. If the person I need to teach is you..." Stop. Dake raised his hand and interrupted her self-introduction. I need to correct you here. The person you need to teach is not me, but my magic guide fairy. Debbie Giles instantly revealed an astonished expression. She clearly didn't think of this at all. However, she quickly looked at the Dilu beast sitting beside Dake and hesitantly said, Magic guide fairy, has enough learning ability? The Dilu beast, who was being stared at by her, frowned and directly said, You have doubts about this? This question really gave Debbie Giles a fright. After a while she carefully said, What do I need to do? Dake frowned and said, Isn't it written in the recruitment requirements? Complete basic education in 3 months. Debbie Giles' face immediately turned gloomy. But I thought it was teaching. At most, it would be teaching the children of other nobles. Dake said, You don't need to think, I need to think. All right, don't make things difficult for her. Claire said. Then Giles, do you have any other questions about completing basic education for a magic guide fairy in 3 months? Debbie Giles said helplessly, Professor, I don't have confidence in teaching non-humans. Claire smiled and looked at Dake. I think this interview should be over, right? Dake nodded. Then Senior Giles, I'll have to trouble you to come here. Debbie Giles was slightly disappointed. It's no trouble, I'm the one lacking. Dake looked at her seriously and suddenly said, If Senior is still interested, Flottie's family seems to be lacking a tutor, you can give it a try. Flottie's family? Debbie Giles thought carefully and looked up. I'll take a look, thank you. Dake nodded. Then we'll meet again if fate wills it. After Debbie Giles left, Dake sighed slightly. It's a pity, I wanted her to teach some magic guide basics in the academy. Yvette said gently, Not everyone can accept being a magic guide fairy teacher. And she also just graduated. She probably doesn't have much confidence in her teaching skills. There's no other way. Dake drank tea and said, Then next. The second interviewee. Silent Sage Buckner Cyrus walked into the reception room with the help of a maid. After he sat down he looked up at the judging panel and was surprised. Carter, you're here too? Yes, Teacher Cyrus. Claire smiled. We haven't seen each other for so many years, how's Teacher's health? Buckner Cyrus leaned his walking stick against the chair and straightened his back as much as possible. He stroked his white beard and said, Don't look at me like this, my health is actually quite good. It's just that my legs are a bit weak, so I have to walk more every day. That's good, Claire said. Teacher, you don't have to introduce yourself. Can you tell us why you want to come to the Duke's mansion to teach? Buckner Cyrus narrowed his eyes. His gaze swept past Yalvet and Dark, and finally landed on the Dilu beast. Then he showed a hint of understanding. I've never seen such a smart magic guide fairy. If the target of my teaching is this group of magic guide fairies, I want to see how much their intelligence can be improved. If not, then I'll take my leave. As expected, the three looked at each other. Claire and Yvette looked at Dake, waiting for his decision. Dake smiled. Then Sir Cyrus, do you think my magic guide fairies can master magic or become magisters? This was a question Dake had been pursuing for a long time. However, after an entire school year, he had only succeeded in letting his magic guide fairies master the simple control of magic power. Buckner Cyrus couldn't help but laugh heartily. Then I'll need to understand more to know. However, it seems that our goals are surprisingly similar. That's a good thing, isn't it? Dake's smile grew wider. How about this? We can sign a trial contract for a month. After a month, we'll see if both parties are willing to renew the contract. If possible, perhaps it won't be just 3 months, but a long-term contract. That's exactly what I want. When Buckner Cyrus said this, his whole body straightened a lot. Even his mental state had improved. Then Jasmine. Dake looked at the head maid and said, Bring a chair over. Bring a chair in. And have Mr. Cyrus wait here for a moment. Therefore Buckner Cyrus, the silent sage, stayed in the guest room. The third interviewee was called in. The former head of the Royal Botanic Garden, Madame Badiplant, walked straight into the room. She looked at Cyrus, who was sitting on the side, and frowned. It's decided? Madame Plant, please take a seat, Dake said. We expect to hire at least 2 tutors. Madame Plant sat down in the middle chair and asked, There are a lot of tutors? Dark nodded and said, Yes, there are about 18 of them. Maybe one more. He thought of the moon god's soul. 19 students? That's not a lot, Madam Plant said. Then you're not the one who needs to be tutored. Can you tell me who it is? It's me, Madam Plant, the Diru Beast said calmly. Madam Plant's eyebrows shot up. Of course, she had noticed this magic guide fairy from the beginning, but she didn't think too much about it. However, she wasn't as confused as Debbie Giles. You need me to tutor a magic guide fairy? I have experience in teaching plants. This magic guide fairy can actually speak. Then it should have enough learning ability, right? As expected, the longer you live, the more interesting things you see. If you have a grass-type magic guide fairy, I can try teaching them magic. What do you think? We have a grass-type one, and it has a grass-type nemesis. Dake facepalmed. Although Madam Plant was old, she had a good aura, and was very receptive to magic guide fairies. But what was with teaching plants? Were all the plants in the Royal Botanic Garden sentient? Dake thought for a moment and suddenly thought of something. Madam Plant, how much do you know about catgrass? Catgrass? Is it a new type of plant? Madam Plant asked, puzzled. Dake couldn't help but feel a bit regretful, but he still said, it's a mimicry plant with complete animal characteristics. If Madam Plant is interested, I can take you to take a look. Madam Plant thought for a moment and asked, so I passed the interview? Dake shook his head. Not yet. Can I ask why you want to apply for a tutoring position? Madam Plant said very straightforwardly. I'm retired and looking for something to do. At my age, if I don't exercise my muscles and bones often, they will rust. No problem. Dake nodded. He could accept this reason. Then, what subjects can you teach? Madam Plant said confidently. I have no problem with basic literacy and arithmetic. Also, I can try teaching the basics of magic. That person sitting over there is a magus, right? My specialization doesn't overlap with his. Teaching the basics of magic? Dake nodded slightly. If possible, he was interested and might be able to listen. Thus, he quickly made a decision. Then the probation period is 1 month. If both sides are satisfied, the contract can be renewed in a month. Also, you will have priority in June, July, and August every year. Is that okay? June, July, and August? Madam Plant thought for a moment and suddenly said, okay, 3 months a year. Not bad, not bad. Looks like we've reached an agreement. Dake couldn't help but smile. He didn't dislike this energetic old lady. Then, Madam Plant sat next to Sage Cyrus. The two old people chatted for a while before the 4th interviewee was called in. It was the former tutor of the 2 little princesses, Madam Monica Cook. When Madam Cook saw Madam Plant and Sir Cyrus, she also showed a puzzled expression. However, she didn't ask directly like Madam Plant. Instead, she sat in the middle according to the procedure and waited for the interview to begin. Without a doubt, her professionalism was the highest among all the interviewees so far. Just this performance alone was enough to make Dark have a good impression of him. He didn't let Madam Cook introduce herself. Instead, he directly asked her why she was applying for a job. Madam Cook said helplessly, the 2 princesses have grown up. I don't think there's anything I can teach them, so I resigned. After all, I'm not a magus. After resigning, I naturally need to find another job. Someone recommended the Duke's mansion to me, so I came to give it a try. A very good reason. Dake nodded. Then, what are the subjects that you can teach? Madam Cook began to list the subjects that she was good at one by one. That was really all-encompassing, from calligraphy, arithmetic, geography, to history, music, tea ceremony, apart from magic, magic conduction, and combat-related content. She could teach him everything. This made Dake think of his own tutor in the past. A tutor that was chosen by the royal family was indeed extraordinary. Compared to Madam Plant and Sir Cyrus, Madam Cook was clearly more professional. With her as the center of the teaching process, she should be able to give the elves the best education. So Dake pointed at the Diru Beast and said, last question, what do you think of teaching elves? Elves. Madam Cook was confused. I don't know much about elves, but can they understand human language? Of course they can. The Diru Beast said helplessly. Madam Cook was startled, but she quickly calmed down. That's good. But are all your elves this? Cute? I mean, I can't do too well with those that are too fierce. That's not the case. Dake smiled. They're all very cute. Madam Cook let out a long sigh and smiled. Since they can understand human language and can speak, I can give it a try. Dake shook his head. They can understand human language, but not all of them can speak. In fact, some elves need language lessons. Madam Cook hesitated. Then I can only promise to give it a try. All right. Dake nodded. It was already very difficult for the elves to not reject him. Next, he discussed the contract with Miss Cook, and they finalized it. Only one left. Dake let out a sigh of relief. Among the 5 candidates, except for that senior, they were all very reliable. In fact, he was quite surprised. That senior was a bit lacking in acceptance and lacked confidence. This was not rare in the House of Fools. It was a pity. As for the other 3 candidates, they were all very good. He even felt like he had found a treasure. Then, in the end, as long as we deal with Madame Camilla, today's interview will be over. Dake, Yvette, and Claire looked at each other and smiled. It seemed that their thoughts were very similar. If Camilla came for Aurora, Dake would agree to her application. But if it was for political reasons, Dake didn't want the elves to be too involved in politics. So next, they needed to have a good interview. 4 and 1 8000 plus, 86/233. Continue tonight, please vote. Chapter 473. In the waiting room 2 rooms away, Camilla was bored to death as she flipped through the newspaper. She had signed up as soon as the Duke's mansion sent out the recruitment notice. At that time, things had not started to get out of hand. Her thoughts were very simple. Just as Dake had guessed, she wanted to have a legitimate reason to enter the Duke's mansion. However, as things got out of hand, this reason became untenable. Regardless of whether she was a tutor or not, she would still be criticized. It was better to just ignore it and do whatever she wanted. Silver Wolf Night. Camilla had never been a person who followed the rules. Now that she had entered the interview phase, she was prepared to give it her all. Yes, at least that was what she thought when she first arrived. However, as the last candidate to arrive, she noticed the other 4 candidates waiting inside as soon as she entered the waiting room. Then she felt uneasy. Silent Sage Buckner Cyrus? The former director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Barbara Plant? The former tutor of the 2 little princesses, Monica Cook? Remember, https://m, but can't you? VIP other than the slightly immature graduate from the Shung Malian Academy, she did not feel that she had any advantages. With these 3 people in front of her, how could she pass the interview? Forget it, I'll just deal with it casually. Camilla yawned, put down the newspaper, and squinted her eyes. Compared to the others, she knew from the beginning that the tutor would be Dake Diming's elves. This was because she had learned a lot about Dake from the conversations she had with Deanna at night. When Deanna mentioned Dake, she would be very excited. Then she would talk nonstop about Dake. Sometimes she would even mention it repeatedly. Camilla felt that her ears were going to grow calluses from listening to it. She knew that Dake's elves were very smart. Not only did they have the habit of eating and sleeping, but they could also learn on their own. They were almost as intelligent as humans. Because of this, she was even more satisfied with Dark Diamond as a person. Deanna's behavior was too obvious. As her mother, of course, she could only support her from the standpoint of her daughter. As a result, the Great Bayer family was really considering the marriage alliance. Of course, it was still under consideration. After all, Deanna and Dake were still young. Nowadays, the legal age for marriage had been raised to 16 years old for both men and women. In 2 years, it was very likely that the age for men would be raised to 18 years old. As the nobles who made the law, they naturally had to set an example and not violate the marriage law. However, not getting married didn't mean that they couldn't get engaged first. Camilla had secretly decided that if Deanna still had feelings for Dake 2 years later when she was 14 years old, she would go and ask for her hand in marriage. Madam Viscount, it's your turn. The voice of the head maid, Jasmine, woke Camilla from her memories. She straightened her collar and followed Jasmine to the guest room. Of the 3 candidates sitting in the reception room, it was obvious that they had passed the interview, so she was the only one left. Camilla sat down on the chair in the middle and waited quietly for the interview to begin. Seeing that she sat down, Dake said directly, "Aunt Camilla, let's skip the pleasantries. I have a few questions for you to answer." Camilla showed a gentle smile and nodded. "Go ahead." Dake said first of all, the old question. "Why did you apply to be a private tutor here?" Camilla thought for a while and said frankly, "I heard that Aurora will be staying in the Duke's mansion until school starts." Dake nodded slightly. This was the answer he was looking forward to. "Then the second question," Dake said. "How can you guarantee that you won't be half-hearted when you work in the Duke's mansion because you want to find Aurora?" The corners of Camilla's mouth curled up slightly as she pointed at her own heart. "I guarantee it with my character." The character of the Silver Wolf Knight was the proof. Dake blinked and couldn't help but sigh. Of course, he couldn't openly doubt the character of Deanna's mother here, so he could only push on to the third question. In fact, this question was the most important one. Whether or not Camilla could pass the interview depended on this question. He asked, "The third question, what advantages do you think you have in teaching compared to the 3 who have already passed the interview?" Camilla's expression froze as she looked at the 3 private tutors. The 3 private tutors nodded slightly at her and smiled kindly. She couldn't help but hold her forehead and say, "Do your magic guide fairies need physical training? Okay, that's not possible. Then are they interested in fist techniques?" "Fist techniques?" Dake couldn't help but be interested. Camilla nodded and said, "With the Valkyrie here, I won't embarrass myself with my swordsmanship. But in terms of hand techniques, I might not be worse than her." In the face of her confidence, Yelvette only smiled slightly. Dake's eyes lit up. "Speaking of which, I did miss out on sports. Moral, intellectual, physical, aesthetic, and labor, of course they have to be well-rounded." Having intelligence was the biggest advantage of his magic guide fairies, but sometimes it could become a disadvantage. It depended on the magic guide fairy's willpower and reaction. And practicing martial arts could indeed train willpower. Moreover, it could also maximize the magic elf's advantage. After all, who could block a magic elf that knew fist techniques? Originally, the battle between magic guide fairies was mostly a clash of pure strength. Once they mastered the technique to turn the situation around, it wasn't impossible for the weak to defeat the strong. The remaining problem was that there were actually many people in the Duke's mansion who had this kind of technique. In other words, they didn't need Camilla to teach them. Dake couldn't help but turn to Yvette to ask for her opinion. After seeing Yvette nod slightly, he said, "Actually, it doesn't have to be limited to fist techniques. There are many things that can be taught in 3 months. If Aunt Camilla thinks it's okay, I hope to teach according to the fairies' aptitude and customize a set of combat techniques according to their characteristics." Of course. A smile appeared on Camilla's face. She knew that her interview was a success. After that, not only could she come to see her precious niece every day, she could also bring Deanna with her. That was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. After the relevant matters were discussed, and the 4 tutors left their contact details and addresses, Dake invited them. "Since the 4 tutors have passed the interview, why don't we have lunch together in the Duke's mansion?" Without waiting for them to refuse, Dake said, "After lunch, I hope to have a preliminary understanding of the teaching methods of the 4 tutors. We'll each have an experimental class this afternoon." Since he said so, the 4 tutors naturally wouldn't refuse. Thus, the group of people had lunch together in the Duke's mansion. Fortunately, Castellan Susanna Montilfoli had something to do today and didn't ruin the atmosphere. Aurora's arrival made Camilla very happy. The other 3 tutors looked at the magic guide fairies eating around the table with different expressions. The silent sage, Buckner Cyrus's eyes lit up and looked like he couldn't wait to pounce on them. On the other hand, the former director of the Royal Botanical Garden, Barty Plant, looked at the garbage slime drinking soup on the table and was a little tempted. Among Dake's magic guide fairies, only this garbage slime was grass type and firmly attracted her attention. On the other hand, Ms. Monica Cook was stunned by the young green-eyed dragon. She really wanted to question Dake. Didn't he say that they were all little cuties? Why was there a dragon? Of course, if she really asked, Dake would let the young green-eyed dragon show its belly. Presumably after that, Ms. Cook would not find it frightening. This lunch was very enjoyable for all the guests. After lunch, everyone took a short break and directly started the teaching experiment. Yvette and Claire took their leave after that. They were still busy with work. The classroom of the Magic Guide Fairies was set up in an empty room on the first floor of the mansion. Dake had already set up paradise here. Among the tutors, except for Ms. Cook, all of them could sense the magic wave of the field card, but they didn't ask much. Let's start with Mr. Cyrus. Dake directly pointed at the silent sage. Then he and the others sat at the end of the classroom and listened. A total of 18 Magic Guide Fairies sat on custom-made chairs and listened to Cyrus's lecture obediently. Cyrus sat behind the podium and summoned a humanoid Magic Guide Fairy at the beginning of the lesson, ordering it to assist in the teaching. This very well solved the problem of its legs being inconvenient. As it didn't bring a textbook, Cyrus only taught the simplest things. It didn't show off its profound knowledge and completed the 15-minute experiment course in an ordinary manner. However, this was exactly what Dake needed. During the teaching process, Cyrus interacted well with the Magic Guide Fairies and would point out a few humanoid Magic Guide Fairies to answer questions. After Cyrus's lesson ended, Ms. Plant volunteered to walk up to the podium. The old lady gently snapped her fingers, and a miraculous morning glory flower grew out of thin air in front of each of the magical spirits. Ms. Plant smiled and explained, "These are the weeping ghost flowers. They usually grow in extremely dangerous places. They can sense the thoughts of travelers on the surface and convert their thoughts into sounds to lure travelers to come close and then eat them." The Magic Guide Fairies blinked and curiously tried to touch the roots of the weeping ghost flowers. Ms. Cook, who was listening in the back row, shuddered subconsciously. She was extremely repulsed by these man-eating flowers. However, when Ms. Plant started the lesson, the benefits of the weeping ghost flowers were displayed. Even the Magic Guide Fairies that couldn't speak could speak through the flowers as long as they thought after touching them. This operation made Dark gasp in amazement. He couldn't help but wonder if he should get a pot to raise them. With the weeping ghost flowers, the Magic Guide Fairies could express their thoughts more easily. It was a great advantage. However, these weeping ghost flowers were actually Ms. Plant's magic creations and weren't real. If he wanted to raise a pot of weeping ghost flowers, he would have to find the seeds himself. In short, although Ms. Plant's weeping ghost flowers were amazing, her teaching skills were about the same as Cyrus. When the third tutor, Ms. Cook, went on stage to teach, the gap between them was very obvious. Ms. Cook's teaching skills were so high that she smoothly drew out the enthusiasm of the Magic Guide Fairies. Together with Ms. Plant's weeping ghost flowers, they had a lively experimental class. In the end, Camilla was forced to take the stage. Because it was an indoor experimental class, she taught basic knowledge like literacy and arithmetic. As long as she didn't use her hands, Camilla was actually a gentle beauty with a gentle temperament. Although her teaching skills couldn't compare to Ms. Cook's, Camilla was surprisingly good at teaching children. Perhaps it was because she was a mother. There were a total of 4 experimental classes, each lasting 15 minutes. When Camilla finished her lesson, Dake released the Magic Guide Fairies with bitter expressions. Then he discussed with the 4 for about half an hour, and agreed to come back tomorrow. Dake was going to rush out a class schedule overnight according to each tutor's specialty. After sending the tutors away, he locked himself in his bedroom and sped up his work. He still couldn't finalize it until dinner time. It wasn't until 8 or 9 in the evening that he finally came up with a class schedule. The class schedule was generally similar to the Shung Malian Academy's schedule. The only difference was that the duration of each class had changed from 90 minutes to 60 minutes. Taking into account that the tutors had to commute to work, Dake postponed the class from 8 in the morning to 8:30. There was a class from 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning. There was another class from 10 to 11 o'clock. Every day, there were 2 fixed classes, one teaching words and the other teaching arithmetic. Other than these 2 classes, the tutors were free to arrange the rest of the time. From 2 to 3 in the afternoon, and from 3:30 to 4:30. There were 2 classes in the afternoon. They could continue to teach words and arithmetic, or they could change to music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, or magic and the basics of magic. Of course, there were also combat skills. In short, Dake had packed this class schedule to the brim. He didn't even let go of the weekend. The next day, after the 4 tutors arrived, Dake handed over the class schedule he had drafted to them. Other than Ms. Cook's doubts, the other 3 tutors had no problems. Dake couldn't help but ask, "Ms. Cook, do you think there's anything that can be improved on this class schedule?" Ms. Cook said without hesitation, "The interval between classes in the afternoon is too long. I heard that your magic guide fairies don't actually need to take a nap, so why don't we move the first class in the afternoon to 1? There's one class from 1 to 2, another class from 2:30 to 3:30, and another class from 4 to 5. In addition, we can arrange 2 classes in the evening. What do you think?" Dake, 2 and 1 4000 plus, 88/233. Chapter 474. In the end, Dake did not follow Madam Cook's suggestion to change the class schedule. After careful discussion, he built a system with Madam Cook as the main tutor, and the other 3 tutors as support according to the subjects that the 4 tutors were good at. After that, the magic elves were divided into 4 groups, with 4 tutors in charge. Among them, the vampire's daughter and the phoenix girl were listed as the focus of attention, and Madam Cook was solely responsible for them. The Hawkman and the Lion Beast were the fighting-type magic elves, and Camilla was responsible for them. The Trash Slime was the only grass type, and Madam Plant was responsible for it. As such, the 4 groups were as follows: Frowny Face Cook Group, Vampire's Daughter, Phoenix Girl, Sea Lion, Dream Demon, Plant Group, Trash Slime, Variety Monster, Kettle, Milk and Cyrus Group, Secretary Magician, Ibu Fairy Ibu, Little Devil, Green-Eyed Dragon, Camilla Group, Hawkman, Lion Beast, Scabbard, Dilute Beast, Meow Meow Website, https://m, Vipcanchu, VIP. After all the arrangements for the subjects were settled, the 4 tutors left one after another. It was already close to dinner time. Dake gathered the magic elves and had them copy the class schedule. Although most of the magic elves frowned when they were copying the class schedule, they did not protest. Dake pretended not to see. For hours of class time a day was not a lot, and they still had plenty of time. Well, to do homework. At dinner time, Yvette asked Dake about the tutor arrangements, and Dake explained the specific matters one by one. The advantage of having 4 tutors was that they could implement a certain degree of rotation, and they could teach one-on-one, so that the students could grasp the basic knowledge faster and better. Yvette was quite satisfied with his arrangement and said, "Today is Saturday and tomorrow is Sunday. Are you going to start teaching on Monday?" Dake nodded and said, "Yes." Yvette thought for a moment and said, "My suggestion is to increase the weekend. After all, too much is as bad as too little. Also, starting from next Monday, your classes will start. You may need them every weekend after that." Dake frowned. "What do I need to do?" Yvette said solemnly, "Become stronger." Before this year, Yvette had never made any requests of Dake. Even if Dake gave up on practicing the sword because he couldn't bear the hardships, she would let him be. She didn't need her baby to become outstanding. She only hoped that he could live a carefree life. However, the appearance of the Lion Beast and the Dilu Beast, especially the Dilu Beast, made her vigilant. If Dake were to embark on the path of a hero because of her magical fairy, a path that seemed to be cursed by fate, even she couldn't guarantee that she would be able to protect him at all times. As early as the Easter Duel Festival, Arvette had already started making preparations in all aspects. However, she could eliminate external influences for Dake. The internal problems could only be handled by Dake himself. In her mind, she only wanted to become stronger. She wanted to become stronger than brave Brett who had died, stronger than her, the Valkyrie, and even stronger than the Saint, who had passed down the bloodline of the brave. Only then could he break away from all fate and sleep peacefully without any worries. She couldn't imagine what she would become if she lost Dake one day. Fortunately, the rapid development of magical engineering had already revealed a path to infinite possibilities. This era was no longer an era where humans were at the mercy of others. Even if the gods descended, they could no longer treat humans as livestock. In order not to lose him, Yvette had already prepared herself to harden her heart. Even if Dake rejected her again, she would still force herself to do it. However, what made her feel gratified was that Dake had indeed become sensible. After dinner, the mother and son went for a stroll in the backyard while holding hands. They talked for a while beside Diesel's seed. They sat on the lawn and looked up at the stars in the night sky. Their moods gradually calmed as they listened to the frolicking sounds of the aquatic beasts not far away. The atmosphere continued until Yvette snickered and asked Dake how he felt about Deanna and Luosi. It was very comfortable. After the stroll, the two of them returned to their rooms. After Dake drew the great sins for the day, he asked Olga to bring some tea and snacks. Then he sat in a circle with the magical engineering elves and had a simple chat. Since returning home, Dake summoned the moon goddess soul for the first time. Without transforming into armament, the moon goddess soul was like a mechanical girl. Other than her body being made of metal, she was no different from an ordinary human. Moreover, she also had enough mana recovery ability to support normal activities. This meant that she could be like the Phoenix Maiden, and didn't have to worry about running out of mana. In fact, the moon goddess soul wasn't a magical engineering elf. If one had to describe it, her current form should be similar to a self-aware armor. Similar types of magical beasts were not uncommon in the dungeon. I thought you had forgotten about me. After the moon god's soul materialized, it complained in an aggrieved manner. Dake smiled awkwardly and looked away. He couldn't tell her that he had forgotten about her, could he? The moon goddess soul didn't have any fighting ability. Her path of growth had been sealed. Only by absorbing more divinity from the root could she complete her transformation. Before absorbing enough divinity from the root, she wouldn't even have the ability to cast spells. She was destined to never become a magus or a magus. As a result, Dark rarely thought about her when he was planning for the elf studies. If you want to attend classes, Dake thought for a moment and said, I can let you join the study group as a magical engineering elf. Classes? Can you help me become a moon goddess? The moon goddess soul asked in surprise. Dake was silent for a moment and said, No. The moon goddess soul immediately said, Then I won't go. However, Dake changed his mind. But I want you to attend classes now. The moon goddess soul said, How can you do that? Dake shook his head. You have to attend classes. Then he thought for a moment and said, From now on, you can treat yourself as a magical engineering elf. The name of your card is Moon Maiden. It's the same type of magical engineering elf card as Phoenix Maiden. Do you understand? The moon goddess soul complained. Who's the Phoenix Maiden? It's me. The Phoenix Maiden's voice was abnormally cold. It was a great contrast to her flame-like appearance. Studying not only gave people knowledge, but also self-restraint. Dake gradually realized that the moon goddess soul lacked self-restraint. If he just left her alone, even if she transformed in the future, she might not be able to control the power of a moon goddess. That might bring some trouble. Since he had foreseen the trouble, he naturally had to nip it in the bud. Dake prepared to assign the moon goddess soul to Madame Cook's study group. She would be in the same group as the vampire's daughter and the Phoenix Maiden. Madame Cook was just an ordinary human without any magical talent. She wouldn't be able to sense the uniqueness of the moon goddess soul. So she was a suitable teacher for her. As the night deepened, Dake told a few educational stories as usual before sleeping peacefully. Next, he and the other magical engineering elves were the same. They only had one day of leisure left. On the last day of the summer tutoring, he called the head maid of the Pisces Palace maid group, Janice, over. Janice didn't have the golden armor. The maid group she led was responsible for diplomacy in the Duke's residence, which was the public relations department. However, because the Duke didn't have much of a need for diplomacy, and the Duke didn't like to hold tea parties, she was bored to death every day. Janice was a standard red-haired beauty. She always tied her wine-red hair up high, revealing her snow-white slender neck. Her skin was white and smooth. It was naturally moisturized. Her bearing was very elegant. and her understanding of etiquette wasn't inferior to maid Vigor. She was also very familiar with beauty, makeup, perfume, jewelry, music, and so on. She was very proficient in anything that could increase a woman's charm. Unfortunately, in the Duke's residence, these skills were useless. Even if she dressed up every day, no one would appreciate it. Janice, who was called over by Dake, had a hint of laziness in her eyes. She looked at the young master's handsome side profile when he was reading seriously, and thought that the young master might have reached the age of first awakening of love. She had trained hard for a long time, but never had the chance to use her inner skills. Maybe she could really use them. Janice. Dake's gaze moved away from the Journey Around the World book. Janice's flowery scent drifted into his nose along with the summer wind, making his heart itch. Good morning, young master. Janice bent over slightly, revealing her deep cleavage. Dake turned to look at her and happened to see her full white skin. His heart skipped a beat, but his face didn't change. Do you still have the fishing rod that the old butler used before? Janice, whose lips were already slightly curled up, froze for a moment. But she quickly came back to her senses and nodded. Yes. Okay. Dake nodded. Get ready, I'm going fishing. Fishing. A skill that didn't help increase a woman's charm at all. But Pisces Janice was proficient in it. It was her only hobby. Dake waited for her to leave before closing the book and standing up. This was the last day before the battle began. He was ready to experience the retirement life of his dreams in advance _ smiley face, angle, _ Today's weather was good. There were dark clouds in the sky, but no raindrops. Without the scorching sun, the temperature was much more comfortable. Do you want to go fishing? No. The vampire's daughter picked up Galileo and swung it at Dake. Poor Fat Cat's face was filled with despair. Dake didn't force it. He only brought a few magic elves that were interested in fishing. Then he went out and called for Aurora, and they walked to the pond in the backyard. The pond in the backyard usually didn't have any fish. But when someone wanted to fish, fish would appear in it. That's right, this was the so-called Schrodinger's fish. When Dake came to the pond and sat down, he saw a few maids carrying buckets full of fish and pouring them into the pond. The aquatic beasts in the pond thought that today's dinner had been brought forward to the morning, and immediately pounced on it happily. But one of the maids glared at them, and a general aura hit them in the face, causing them to immediately stop. The aquatic beasts swallowed their saliva and looked at the fish swimming in the pond, making woo-woo sounds. But as the head maid with the fishing rod approached quickly, even the woo-woo sound stopped. All the aquatic beasts shrank to the corner of the pond and raised their front paws to show that they absolutely didn't steal the food. Young master, the fishing rod is here. Jenny put the fishing rod and the other tools beside Dake's feet, and then took off the bag with the other fishing rods from her back, taking one out and handing it to Aurora. Aurora was staring with wide eyes at those wacky aquatic beasts, and actually forgot to take it for a moment. Miss Aurora. Jenny looked at her stunned face and explained with a smile, "This is how we fish in the manor." Then she distributed the rest of the fishing rods to the eager magic elves, and very patiently taught them how to use it. The Dilu beast, Meow Meow lion beast, Chio sea lion, green-eyed dragon whelp, and Ivan all sat upright by the pond and started fishing. Although the other magic elves had also come, they had no intention of trying. They all surrounded Dake and looked at him curiously. Dake smiled and fished by the pond for the entire morning. If it was in the past, he would probably have left after 3 minutes. But now, looking at the calm water surface, his state of mind seemed to have calmed down, and the occasional trace of impatience quickly dissipated. Only when a raindrop fell into the pond did Dake slowly retract his fishing rod. It's going to rain. Naturally, he wasn't the raincoat rider fishing in the rain. Before he left, he tossed the fish back into the pond. The magic elves followed suit, and only Meow Meow hugged the small bucket and didn't care. Dake smiled and patted its head, saying, "Bring it back, and let Sister Olga make an all-fish feast for you." Meow. Meow Meow immediately beamed with joy. So tonight's dinner was mainly fish. After they left, there was a sudden explosion of thunder, and heavy rain poured down. Dake played magic chess with Aurora in the manor for the entire afternoon. And the day passed just like that. At night, he drew the last drop of great sin for the month, and then opened the system interface to check. On the 8th, 9th, and 10th he drew pride twice and bliss once. Pride and bliss, which had just poked their heads out, returned to 90 points. And the great sins that Dake saved were frowny face pride, 17 bliss, 1-5 greed, 9-5. After careful consideration, Dake took out the elf egg from the birthday gift. 2 and 1 4,000 plus. There was a thunder just now, and the computer directly went black. I was scared to death. Luckily it was just a power outage. I'm tired, let's continue tomorrow. Good night. Chapter 475. The elf egg that Mayor Montierfali sent over was a rare species found in a temple that worshipped the sun god and the moon god. According to Mayor Montierfali's analysis, it should have been a fire elf egg that absorbed a trace of the sun god's power in ancient times. After thousands of years, it transformed into this sun elf egg. Similar to it was the frost moon elf, which should also be a variant of the ice elf. Dake carefully placed the sun elf egg on the table and took a deep breath. There were 2 conditions to incubate an elf egg. One was a precious treasure of the same element, and the other was fate. Dake originally had a gem that sealed the blood of a fire-type demon. Unfortunately, this sun elf egg had the sun attribute, so it didn't seem to fit. Therefore, he naturally thought of pride, which was perfectly compatible with the sun attribute. Now, pride had a total of 17 points. If he added another 13 points, he would be able to start refining pride. Even though he still had no idea how to refine pride, he had to save them up first. Although that was the case, pride was still far away. Even if he used some of it, it wouldn't be a big deal. But for now, if Dake wanted to activate this elf egg, he didn't need to use 17 points of pride. He still had 3 stalks of the fruit of pride in his hand. Remember the URL. VIP, can't you? VIP. The 3 stems of the fruit of pride could be mixed and squeezed into juice, which could be used together. Dake took out the 3 stems of the pride fruit from the sealed bag one by one. Then he picked out the stem that still had a little bit of madness in it. He cut the other 2 into small pieces and put them into a small bowl. Hoo-hoo, come here. After he was done, Dake called Hoo-hoo over. Even though the stem wasn't the fruit, if he didn't want extra effects and just wanted to make juice, he could ask Hoo-hoo to do it. Bees is easy. Hoo-hoo happily let Dake put the stems into its hole, and juice quickly flowed out. Dake collected the juice into a small beaker. After thinking for a bit, he put the sun elf egg into the beaker filled with juice. Now it's up to it to see if it'll do me the honor. Dake squinted and carefully observed the sun elf egg's reaction. After a while, the sun elf egg suddenly moved, and the juice in the beaker began to decrease at a speed visible to the naked eye. Dirk was immediately overjoyed. Looks like the juice suits its taste. Not long after, the beaker reached the bottom, and the juice with a bit of fiber was. The inside of the sun elf egg was glowing, as if it was expressing some kind of joy. But Dark held his chin and looked at it for a long time, only to find that there was no other movement. Is the juice not enough juice? After all, the stalks of the fruit of pride were only remnants. Even if there were 2 stalks, it wouldn't be a lot. But the remaining 1 stalk, 1 lion beast was enough. Dark didn't want another uncertain factor. Should I use a bit of pride to see? After thinking for a while, Dake finally picked up the demon brain pipette, inserted the tip of his mouth into the thin film of the thinking bottle, and accurately drew out 1 drop. Then he squeezed the demon brain pipette's demon brain in the beaker. Screech! With a sharp cry, the demon brain pipette spat out that drop of pride. As the pride, with a higher purity, dripped down, the elf egg actually jumped up and caught it on its own accord. The drop of pride touched the surface of the sun elf egg, and was quickly absorbed. Almost at the moment when pride was completely absorbed, layers of cracks appeared on the surface of the sun elf egg, and a small sun elf broke out of its shell. Dake blinked, caught off guard by the sun elf egg's sudden incubation. But he was not stunned because of this. In an instant, he reached out his hand and pressed the mouth of the thinking bottle. The flaming sun elf bumped into the back of his hand and bounced back with a bayou sound. Little thing. Dake couldn't help but smile. This sun elf egg had obviously tasted the taste of pride and couldn't help but hatch. But every drop of pride was his blood, sweat, and tears. He couldn't just let it be stolen. While thinking, he suddenly felt a touch in his heart. He raised his right hand unconsciously with his palm facing up. The sun elf egg flew into his palm, wobbling and emitting a trace of warmth. He stared at the sun elf egg rolling in his palm, and vaguely heard some voices in his mind. It seemed to be flattering, but also seemed to be begging. Dake looked at the thinking bottle. In fact, there was only 0.5 points of pride in the bottle, and a thin layer covered the bottom of the bottle. Therefore, he reached out to the mouth of the bottle, tilted it slightly, and let the sun elf roll into the bottle. Slurp! It was as if a tongue had stuck out and licked, and the layer of pride in the thinking bottle was sucked clean. At the same time, Dake suddenly felt a tingling itch between his eyebrows. He turned his head to look at the mirror on the table. A circle of sun-like lines actually penetrated his skin. Dake raised his hand and touched his forehead. There was a strange look in his eyes. Even if he hadn't seen it specifically, he could still see at a glance that this was obviously a kind of contract. Because there was no need to pay, only to enjoy the favor. Therefore, the elf envoys usually called this kind of contract favor. Dake never expected that a mere 1.5 points of pride would successfully buy this sun elf egg. Wasn't this too cheap? As the saying goes, nothing good comes cheap. Could it be an inferior product? With a trace of inevitable doubt, Dake poured out the sun elf from the thinking bottle into his palm. The sun elf intimately rubbed against his palm twice. Then it wobbled and flew up, like a toddler learning to walk, flew to the top of his head, and then burrowed into his hair. Just when Dake thought that the sun elf egg would settle down in his hair, the strand of wind elf's blessing from Professor Earbook that was also hidden in his hair was driven out. Even though it wasn't an elf, wind elf's blessing still had a bit of spirituality. It knew how to fly to Dake and complain. Dake was silent for a moment and tried to say, "Do you want to live somewhere else?" Wind elf's blessing twisted in front of him a few times, as if it finally understood what he meant. It flew around his head twice and finally burrowed into his right ear. Dake suddenly felt a bit uncomfortable. But when he realized that wind elf's blessing only stayed in his ear, he was relieved. This is good too. It's dust-proof. Then he suddenly pulled out a toothpick from his right ear and chuckled alone. He only spent a few resources to obtain the favor of the sun elf. It was completely unexpected. After the flaming sun elf entered his hair, it suddenly stopped moving, as if it had fallen into a deep sleep again. Dake wasn't in a hurry. The path to becoming an elf envoy wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. If he wanted to become an elf envoy like Professor Earbook, the path would be long and difficult. After calming down, Dake spent some time organizing the topics left by the academy. Then he crawled into bed with anticipation for tomorrow. It's about to start. 11th June. Monday. Yesterday's heavy rain made the morning dew even more plentiful. The sparkling and translucent water droplets reflected the miniature of the Duke's mansion. Dark woke up early before the Magic Guide Fairies classes began. He changed into a pure white training suit and gently breathed in the air at 5 o'clock in the morning. He slowly recalled the feeling of going to school, and then pushed open the door. When he arrived in front of Aurora's door, she just happened to be leaving. The girl in pink training suit had her hair tied into a ponytail. There was a faint blush on her face. She had a special aura. Good morning. Good morning. After the two of them greeted each other, they walked to the training field together. Waiting for them in the training field was Yalvet, who had woken up even earlier, and City Lord Susanna Montilferi, who had said she was leaving but hadn't actually left. These two comrades who had known each other for many years came to the same training field again, but they didn't have the mood to compete like before. City Lord Montilferi, who had half of the sun-chasing giant bloodline, had changed into a dark red training suit that she hadn't worn in a long time. Her bones were thicker than normal people's, giving her a unique kind of rough beauty. Beside her, Yalvet, who didn't wear any makeup, wasn't as tall as her, but her chest was just as broad. Her golden hair that was tied into a ponytail casually fell down. There was a hint of freedom in her sensuality. "Susanna, have you taught Aurora how to use ki?" Yelvet asked knowingly. A hint of pride flashed in Susanna's eyes. Not yet. She was born with 9 chakras. Apart from the crown chakra, glabella chakra, throat chakra, heart chakra, umbilical chakra, sea chakra, and Brahma chakra, there was also the sun chakra and the moon chakra. Moreover, she was born with 6 chakras. Even in the giant tribe, she's a 1 in 10,000 talent. I originally planned to wait until she was 14, when her body was close to maturity before teaching her how to use ki. If I teach her now, I'm worried that she might accidentally open all 9 chakras, which would affect her development. As expected of cousins, Yelvet said with some envy. Yvette said enviously, "It seems that Aurora is the same as Diana, born with divine strength. I've seen that child before. She was born with 9 chakras and opened 6. Of the 2 extra chakras, one of them is the moon chakra. Their family's bloodline is indeed powerful." Susanna nodded. "I think Deanna's last chakra should be the bear chakra that she inherited from the Garrett Bayer family." "That should be the case," Yelvet said. Susanna asked curiously, "Then what about your kid? Does he have any talent in this area?" Yelvet couldn't help but say regretfully, "He's average." "That shouldn't be the case." Susanna's face revealed a trace of doubt. "He's your child." Yelvet shook her head slightly. "I only had this talent after awakening the divine bloodline and becoming a saint. Originally, in order to pass on the saint bloodline, I even took a golden apple, but it didn't seem to be successful." "Golden apple?" Susanna said in surprise. "You want to give birth to a natural-born saint?" Yelvet nodded. "My original idea was to create another saint for the family, but that's all in the past. From the moment he was born, I knew that regardless of whether he was a saint or not, he was already the most precious treasure in my life." Susanna recalled empathetically, "When Aurora was born, I had the same feeling." Yelvet's expression suddenly changed and she said, "All right, let's talk about these things later. They're here." After Dake stepped into the indoor practice field, he saw Yelvet and Susanna standing together. He couldn't help but smile and quicken his pace. When Aurora saw that her mother was also there, her eyes widened slightly. When the 4 of them were gathered, Yelvet said, "Very good, you're not late. Do you know what I'm going to teach you from today onwards?" Dake looked up and said, "The use of chi." "That's right," Yelvet said. "Although both of you are extremely talented future magisters, when magisters run out of magic or have no usable magic cards in their hands, they still can't escape the common problem of magic professions. A real battle isn't a duel, but a slaughter. Every enemy would resort to any means necessary to defeat them. Strength in all aspects without any blind spots is true strength." Dake nodded in agreement. Shungmalian was a magic engineering college. They would only offer courses related to martial arts in their elective courses, and they didn't pay much attention to it. If one wanted to master skills in this area, they couldn't rely solely on the college. Yelvet could become the Valkyrie. Of course, it wasn't just because of the high-strength armed card. If one didn't have the corresponding basic strength and skills, even with the arm transformation, they could only fight randomly. In fact, even without the armed card, she was worthy of being called the Valkyrie. To be able to be taught personally by the Valkyrie was something that every kingdom's warrior dared not dream of. However, Dake had rejected it more than once. Yelvet continued, "After you learn the use of chi, I'll teach you the complete refining method of the armed card." Dake curiously asked, "Refining array number 99? Yelvet shook her head and said, "No, it's still the triad armament refining array. Refining array number 99 is not something that you can master now. Then let's warm up first." Speaking of warming up, it was naturally running laps. As for the stretching of the legs before running laps, it was completely out of Yelvet's concept. Fortunately, Dake had always been doing morning exercises, so he didn't lose out in the initial warm-up segment. However, after running a full 10 laps around the arena, he was still sweating and panting. Aurora, who didn't feel anything as if she was taking a stroll, carefully wiped his sweat with a wet towel and handed him a glass of water. Dake picked up the glass and took a sip. Suddenly, a spicy taste went straight down his throat, and his face turned green. 2 and 1 4000 plus. Warriors never sleep charge. Chapter 476. Is this Komodo grass potion really effective? Dark couldn't help but ask after he finished the glass of water. It should work, right? Aurora said uncertainly. After all, she had never drunk it before and had never needed to drink it. Of course it works. Suna walked over and said, the Komodo potion can effectively increase one's physical strength, but it needs to be consumed after one's physical strength is exhausted in order to maximize its effects. Most people who consume it for a month will gain physical strength that takes 3 years of high-intensity training. Of course, there is a limit to physical strength growth. Everyone's talent was different, and so were their limits. The Komodo potion can't help you break through your limits. Dake's face turned green. So I have to consume it for at least a month? Suna teased. What, you don't want to do it? This is something that can't be bought with money. No, Dake said. I'm thinking if I can improve its taste. Actually, that's not difficult. Suna blinked and said. But you have to go through hardships to rise above others. Willpower training is also part of a warrior's training. All right. Dake immediately understood. It wasn't that he couldn't improve it, but that he didn't want to. 1 second to remember https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. However, as the potion took effect, he gradually felt his limbs regaining their strength. His breathing also gradually calmed down, and there was even excess energy surging in his body, eager to be released. Yvette looked at him with some heartache and said carefully, how is it? Do you feel the flow of chi in your body? Chi. Dake couldn't help but frown. Is this chi? Yvette nodded. Another effect of the Komodo potion is to simulate the flow of chi. The process of feeling the chi is like copying a book. Once you're familiar with it, you'll naturally be able to distinguish the real chi. I see. Dake closed his eyes and felt it carefully. The chi simulated by the Komodo potion appeared abnormally clearly in his senses. His study of the underworld god art had clearly made his senses surpass that of ordinary people. He raised his hand and followed the flow of the chi. He drew a few strokes on the front of his body and finally settled near his navel. Thus he said, it stopped. It's mostly gathered here. That's where the umbilical chakra is located. Yvette smiled. It seems that the easiest chakra for you to open is the umbilical chakra. Take a short rest. I'll teach you a breathing technique. If all goes well, I should be able to open my first chakra in a week or 2. Breathing technique? Dake lowered his head and looked at his belly button. Suddenly he asked, how do I open it? Yvette said, chi is produced in the chakra, forming a vortex that flows endlessly. This is the opening. The opening of every meridian will bring about a slight increase in the foundation of one's physique. Hence, the feeling is extremely obvious. Dake pondered. Is there a good and bad breathing method? Yvette shook her head. The breathing techniques that have been passed down to this day are the result of countless tempering. Even if there are good and bad, there isn't much difference. In the end, the breathing technique is just the key to opening the chakra. The characteristics of a warrior are determined by the chakra, not the breathing technique. So that's how it is. Dake took a deep breath. Then let's begin. Yvette opened the ceiling of the arena to allow fresh air to flow in. She instructed Dake and Aurora to sit cross-legged in the center of the arena. She adjusted their sitting positions slightly and sat in front of them. Then she began to teach them the breathing technique. Susanna Montefiore stood at the side and observed carefully. The breathing technique was not difficult in nature. Moreover, there was no threshold. During wartime, everyone practiced martial arts. Almost every soldier had to learn the breathing technique. Even if they were unable to open their chakras, they could use the breathing technique to regulate their breathing. This would increase their physical strength and allow them to be more stable and durable during long journeys. Once the chakra was opened, it was equivalent to mastering an entry-level buff spell that could be instantly cast without casting a spell. One only needed to circulate the chi to the corresponding part to strengthen it to a certain extent. As more chakras were opened, the quality and quantity of the chi would continuously increase. The strengthening effect would also increase level by level. Opening 3 chakras was equivalent to mastering an entry-level buff spell. Opening 6 chakras was equivalent to mastering an intermediate-level buff spell. If one could open the 7th chakra, it was equivalent to mastering an intermediate-level buff spell. At the same time, one could also master a special exclusive spell. Of course, the quality and quantity of the chi, as well as the force, that one could master after opening all 7 chakras, were all different from person to person. For highly talented people like Deanna and Aurora, the chi produced by their chakras was much faster than the consumption. They did not even need to mobilize the chi to fuse into their limbs and bones. This was not even within the scope of intermediate-level buff spells. Instead, it was equivalent to having an intermediate-level buff spell at all times. This was also the so-called innate divine strength. It was almost impossible for a normal warrior to reach this level. After only half an hour, Yvette had completely taught them the breathing technique. Dake relied on the mental fortitude that he had gained from practicing the Underworld God spell, and practiced the breathing technique according to Yvette's teachings. A complete cycle of the breathing technique took about 5 minutes. 3 cycles were equivalent to 1 cycle, which was 15 minutes. Other than the sluggishness in the beginning, Dake gradually became more proficient. After 15 minutes, he successfully completed a cycle of breathing and inhaling. Then he clearly felt a wave of heat converging near his abdomen and navel. He suddenly opened his eyes and was about to speak when Yvette immediately pressed the space between his eyebrows. "Don't be discouraged. Continue with 2 more cycles." Dake immediately calmed down and continued to practice the breathing technique. Seeing that he had closed his eyes again, Yvette slightly retracted her fingers and looked at Susanna Montier-Folly with a serious expression. Both of their eyes were filled with slight surprise. This was because Dake's navel showed signs of opening after only 1 cycle. Although he was not as talented as Diana and Aurora, his talent was obviously not something that could be described as average. Aurora, who was sitting beside Dake, also opened her eyes at this time and looked curiously at Dake's side profile. Her skin emitted a halo of light, which was a sign that her meridians were unobstructed. It could be seen that she had just learned the breathing technique and had already connected all 6 chakras in her body, allowing her to circulate them freely. Thus, she did not continue and only secretly sized up Dake. Another half an hour later, Dake completed the 3rd cycle without any obstruction. The heat emitted from his navel finally reached a threshold and erupted without any hindrance. In an instant, the heat flowed around his body and caused his physique to improve. Shockingly, an invisible vortex had formed at his navel. "It's open just like that?" Dake opened his eyes and slowly adapted to the changes in his body. Because it was too easy, he didn't even feel anything. "Congratulations, you've already taken the first step on the path of a warrior." City Lord Montier-Folly revealed a look of admiration. Yvette was still thinking, "It's strange. Talent is something that should be determined at birth. Under normal circumstances, your talent should only be able to open all 7 chakras. But now, your talent has clearly increased greatly." Talent increased? After hearing this, Dake's pupils couldn't help but shrink as he thought. It can't be because of the initial awakening of the demon god bloodline, right? His demon god bloodline had already begun to awaken because of the memories from his previous life. It was just that the awakening process had remained at 0%, so there were no signs of his bloodline being exposed. But even so, his magic talent had increased by a terrifying amount. Almost every day when he woke up, it would increase. But that was the demon god bloodline, and the chi talent belonged to humans. At most, it could be extended to demi-humans. In theory, it had nothing to do with the demon god bloodline. Could there be other reasons? Dake couldn't help but fall into deep thought. "Let's retest your talent." Yvette's words interrupted Dake's thoughts. He asked, "What should I do?" Yvette said, "You just need to close your eyes." Dake closed his eyes. Yvette then raised her hand and pressed her finger between his eyebrows again. Then, Dake felt a warm current seep between his eyebrows and slowly spread to every corner of his body. About 2 minutes later, Yvette retracted her finger. Her eyes were filled with surprise. How is it? City Lord Munterfolly asked curiously. Yvette said excitedly. 8 chakras. There's an additional hidden chakra. That's a good thing, City Lord Munterfolly also exclaimed. Your family's treasure is really blessed by nature. Even if you're not a natural-born saint, it's not impossible for you to awaken after birth. It seems that the golden apple you took to maintain the purity of your bloodline isn't completely useless. Moo. Yvette hugged Dake's head and gave it a fierce peck. Then she said, since you've already opened the first chakra, then let's start the physical strengthening training. Wait. Dake struggled to break free from Yvette's embrace. He asked doubtfully, if there are 8 chakras, then what's the 8th chakra? Yvette let go and said slowly, if I'm not wrong, it should be the Lion King chakra. Lion King chakra? What's the special characteristic? Dake's mind moved slightly. He suddenly had some ideas. Yvette explained, humans normally only have 7 chakras. Only those with exceptional talent have more than 7 chakras. These extra chakras are like the 7th chakra, outside the human body. Every time you open a chakra, you'll have an additional force. In magician terms, it's equivalent to having an additional exclusive spell. I see, Dake said expectantly. I hope my force can have the elegance of the Beast King Fist. Yvette asked doubtfully, Beast King Fist? Dake smiled. It's a sure kill technique of the lion beasts. The opening of the first chakra was only the beginning of the path of martial arts. In order to master the Beast King Fist as soon as possible, Dake clenched his teeth and began high-intensity physical strengthening training under Yvette's distressed gaze. Aurora, who had been training with him at the beginning, quit midway because it wasn't effective. She changed her profession and became a support worker who wiped sweat and handed water. On the other side, Dake's magic guiding fairies also began their learning journey with the arrival of the tutors. Because Dake gave the right to reward the tutors with little red flowers, the magic guiding fairies were also encouraged. Madam Cook's teaching was very strict. The magic guiding fairies who didn't pay attention in class would be called to the lectern and beaten with a ruler. Although the magic guiding fairies' reaction to pain was weaker than humans, and Madam Cook's strength couldn't break through their defense. But the humiliation of being punished in public still spurred them to pay attention. In short, they could beat them, but they couldn't lose face. The first day of the summer cram school. Whether it was Dake, the master, or his magic guiding fairies, they all passed through the pain and happiness smoothly. At night, Dake dragged his tired body and organized a farewell banquet for City Lord Montefiore with everyone. After the banquet, City Lord Montefiore called him to the balcony alone. Dake could roughly guess what she wanted to say, so he took the initiative to say, Aunt Susanna, you don't have to worry about Dake. I'll take good care of Aurora like my own sister. City Lord Montefiore was instantly silenced. After a while, she turned to look at the night sky and faintly said, then I'll leave it to you. When the two returned to the living room, Aurora couldn't help but approach Dake and ask, what did my mother say? Dake faintly said, she told me to take good care of you like my own sister. Aurora. The episode of the evening passed in a flash. Early the next morning, City Lord Montefiore officially left the Duke's mansion. After Dake and Aurora sent her off, they returned to the practice field and continued to train. Dake woke up at 5 in the morning every day. He first warmed up, then drank a cup of Komodo magic potion, and sat down to practice the breathing technique. After 4 cycles, he would stop to eat breakfast and read a newspaper to relax. After resting for half an hour, he would start high-intensity physical training until dinner time. At night, he would continue to study the topics left behind by the academy and do his summer homework. The professors gave different summer homework to everyone. Dake didn't have much homework, but they all had a certain degree of difficulty, so he might spend more time on them. Just like that, Dake felt as if he had returned to the academy, and his daily life was back on track. A week passed in the blink of an eye. At 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, he suddenly had an epiphany. He felt a warmth in his chest and his heartbeat became stronger. He immediately closed his eyes again and continued to practice the breathing technique for 3 cycles. The second chakra near his heart, the heart chakra, suddenly opened. After opening 2 chakras, Dake's basic physique rose again, and he had greater control over every part of his body. His fingers were steadier, his wrist joints were more flexible, and his arms were stronger. He had the foundation to practice the sword. Dake had practiced the sword before, but he only used a wooden sword. If he used a metal sword, he might not even be able to wield it freely. That night, Yvette finished her work and returned home. When she heard the good news, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. Olga also cooked Dake's favorite lamb. The entire Duke's mansion was filled with a cheerful atmosphere. No one thought that the young master, who didn't even bother to touch a sword in the past, would be able to endure such high-intensity training. And in just a week he completed the preliminary training and opened 2 chakras. Among the warriors, this was already considered to be a higher level. If he mastered the corresponding level of martial arts, he would be welcomed by the various guilds even if he applied for adventurers. The next day, Monday, Yvette asked for leave again, and began to teach Dake basic sword skills. Aurora, who had been in the logistics department for a week, finally had something to learn. She began to practice swinging the sword with Dake. When the two of them were on the same level, the difference in talent was reflected. Even though Dake's talent wasn't weak, he still couldn't compare to her. Therefore, in the following time, he truly experienced the difference between an excellent student and an inferior student. This long-lost feeling of lagging behind others gave him even more motivation. On Wednesday, Silver Wolf Night, Camilla also joined in with her study group. The Horned Hawkman, Lion Beast, Lone Scabbard, Diru Beast, and Meow Meow followed Dake to the training field at 5 in the morning under the envious gazes of the magic elves. After Camilla received Yvette's approval, she also came to the Duke's mansion early in the morning and replaced the busy Yvette as Dake and Aurora's swordsmanship teacher. As the training field became more and more lively, the learning atmosphere also became more and more intense. Dake gradually realized that even with the addition of the magic elves, he was still the worst one. But losing to his own babies was embarrassing? Of course it was embarrassing. Therefore, Dake became more and more determined. At the end of the month, which was about to end in June, he turned his grief and anger into strength. In less than 2 weeks, he made another breakthrough. The opening of the 3rd chakra, the ocean chakra, made his energy more vigorous and his eyebrows more handsome. His appearance, which was originally gentler due to his age, now had more of a heroic spirit. At the same time, his swordsmanship finally reached the entry level, and he could wield the sword properly. But that was the end of his comfortable period. Starting from the 4th chakra, the difficulty of opening it increased exponentially. According to Camilla, even with his talent, it would be very good if he could successfully open the 4th chakra during this summer vacation. Dake asked Yvette during dinner and received a similar answer. He temporarily let go of the idea of cultivating to the peak. After dinner, Yvette supported her chin and said, "Originally, I planned to teach you the complete method of triad armament refining after you open the 1st chakra. But seeing that you opened the 1st chakra so quickly, I couldn't help but look forward to the 2nd chakra." After the 2nd chakra, it was the 3rd chakra. In the end, it dragged on until now. "So that's how it is." Dake laughed dryly. "Then, when do we start learning triad armament refining?" Even though he had shown great interest in training, compared to mastering magic arts, chi and swordsmanship were still boring to him. Yvette saw that her baby was so proactive and said with a smile, "Today is Saturday, then the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow is Sunday, so we can summarize the 3 weeks of training." Dake was startled. "How?" Yvette said slowly. "Of course it's a duel." "A duel?" Dake lay on his bed and flipped through Journey Around the World. For the first time he felt a little intimidated by a duel. Ouch. He couldn't help but make a sound when he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. The force exerted on his back decreased slightly. "Young master, does it still hurt?" Olga asked with concern. "Don't worry about me, continue," Dake replied. Olga continued to apply the 100 refinement ointment on his shoulder, back, waist and legs. Then she circulated her chi and massaged it. This scene had been going on for 3 weeks. Olga would arrive punctually before Dake went to bed every night. The 100 refinement ointment of the Great Bayer family played a huge role in his rapid improvement. Olga slowly massaged from his shoulder to his back and smiled. What's wrong, young master? Are you afraid of tomorrow's duel? I'm not afraid. Dake narrowed his eyes. Olga asked curiously. Then why are you sighing? Dake said slowly. I'm thinking about how to make myself look less miserable if I lose. Oofed. Olga couldn't help but laugh. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Dake cried out in pain. It was Olga who had carelessly failed to control her strength. Dake had always wondered how such a slender finger could release such a powerful force. Now he finally understood. Every headmaid in the Duke's mansion was a dual cultivator of magic and martial arts. However, the magic in martial arts was the magic in magic. Their usage of the armed card had all been personally taught by our vet. In terms of martial arts, they had all opened all 7 wheels and were at the peak of perfection. Olga reduced her strength and said, Young master, the most important thing before a duel is to be afraid of the enemy. Rest well tonight, and maybe you can perform better tomorrow. Dake couldn't help but roll his eyes. Better than usual? Surpassed the normal limit? The corner of Olga's mouth twitched. She wanted to laugh again, but this time, she managed to hold it in. Actually, young master has opened all 3 wheels, and is considered an elite soldier in the army. You're considered the backbone of the army, so don't belittle yourself. Dake said, An elite soldier is still a soldier. Olga retorted, But an elite soldier is better than a normal soldier. Dake said, But my opponent is a magic beast. How can you describe Miss Aurora like that? Olga continued to press down. And the other opponents are also your magic elves. Dake saw that she still didn't know, so he couldn't help but sigh. If it's just Aurora and the lion beast, it'll be fine. But there will be a special guest tomorrow. Olga curiously asked, Who? Dake looked hopeless. Deanna. I can go play with Dake tomorrow? In the Great Bayer mansion, Silver Wolf Knight Camilla's bedroom. Deanna was lying beside her mother with her 2 little legs propped up and her mouth pouted. Camilla had successfully sneaked into the Duke's mansion, but until now, she had never taken her to play. Viscount Great Bayer was even worse. He dragged her to practice every day and didn't find it annoying at all. She was a magus, not a warrior. She really didn't know what was the use of practicing those things. She couldn't fight in a duel competition. And because of that, she hadn't even touched her summer homework until now. Forget it. Summer homework and whatnot, she would think about it in 2 days. She could finally go play with Dake tomorrow, hee. Camilla looked at her baby daughter who was minding her own business, and sighed in her heart. Girls were more outgoing, but she couldn't help but show a trace of pride on her face. Deanna's talent in magic was not weak, but her talent in martial arts was even stronger. If it wasn't for the fact that the upper limit of martial arts was far lower than magic, she would definitely hope that her daughter could aim to reach the peak of martial arts. Now she could only focus on magic and try her best to take into account martial arts. If possible, she hoped that her daughter could become a Valkyrie like our vet. But if she wanted to become a Valkyrie, she would have to create a powerful armed card. She didn't have any achievements in this area, and there were very few people in the Great Bayer family who had such a high talent in magic. Deanna was already an extremely rare example. It would be great if she could become our vet's disciple. Camilla couldn't help but mutter. She had specifically asked about this 2 days ago, but our vet had no intention of accepting a disciple at all. If she wanted to be taught by the Valkyrie, she would have to become an insider. Let's just go with the flow. Camilla shook her head and chased her daughter out. Deanna hummed and ran back to her bedroom. She was very happy. July 1st. The summer heat was getting hotter and hotter. Today was Sunday, and the magic elves used the entire Saturday to finish their homework. After that, they all had time to rest. Thus, the group of little cuties held hands and came to today's duel venue, the indoor martial arts arena. Apart from them, the maids in the Duke's mansion who were bored out of their minds also brought snacks and sat on the long bench outside the arena after getting the approval of their respective head maids. It was rare for the young master to participate in a duel, so of course, they wouldn't miss it. Thus, when Dake and Aurora entered the arena side by side, they found that the martial arts arena was already full of people. This duel, which was supposed to be extremely private, seemed to be spreading to the entire Duke's mansion in an unstoppable manner. What made him feel even more speechless was that as soon as he stepped in, the maids immediately put down the things in their hands and bowed in unison. "Greetings, young master." They were really imposing. But this show of extravagance didn't help the fact that it would be very difficult for him to win. The magic elves gathered in a place. The vampire's daughter excitedly stood on her tiptoes and waved at him. She also imitated the maids and shouted, "Young master, over here, over here." Dake felt awkward when he heard it. He couldn't help but miss the time when the little cutie still couldn't speak skillfully and called him Papa Papa. Ever since she mastered the standard speech under Madam Cook's guidance, she never called him Papa again. Sigh. Dake sighed deeply. He felt like an old father watching his daughter grow increasingly distant. But he didn't stop and soon arrived in front of the magic elves. "Where are the Dilu beast and the others?" Dake glanced and asked. The vampire's daughter squeezed in between him and Aurora. She grabbed his arm and said, "Sister Dilu beast and the others are with Teacher Camilla." "They're already here?" Dake braced himself and sat down on the bench. Then he stuffed a candy into his mouth. Other than him and Aurora, there was also the special guest Deanna, the magic elves, the Eagleman wrestler, the lion beast, the Dilu beast, Meow Meow, and the sword scabbard. In short, all the students in Camilla's group were participating. Under the guidance of a professional teacher, the magic elves had trained hard for 3 whole weeks. Their growth speed wasn't slower than Dake's. After Dake learned about the list of contestants, he set a small goal for himself. "If I'm not last place, I'll win." He carefully analyzed this. Among all the opponents, only the 3-star Eagleman wrestler and Meow Meow were the easiest to deal with. And among these 2 magic elves, the Eagleman wrestler was slightly weaker than Meow Meow. The most important thing was that the Eagleman wrestler's hands were connected to its wings. The air resistance of the feathers would reduce the speed of its fists. And it didn't use a sword. As the saying goes, an inch longer is an inch stronger. Dake also had an advantage in terms of weapons. Of course, the real reason was that Meow Meow was too strong. Meow Meow, who had the ultimate skill technique expert, had an inhuman grasp of small tricks. Among all of Dake's magic elves, even the sword scabbard, which was the sword itself, didn't improve as fast as Meow Meow in terms of swordsmanship. Even Arvette gave it high praise and thought that it was a genius in swordsmanship. In comparison, the hero Dilu beast and the hero lion beast were actually at a disadvantage. This made the Dilu beast very unhappy. Dake could see it go out every night to practice swordsmanship. In short, apart from the Eagleman wrestler, he couldn't see any chance of winning. Therefore, he wasn't afraid of fighting. It was just a rational judgment. In this kind of situation, he obviously wouldn't force himself to win. Therefore, other than the small goal he set for himself, he also considered whether his magic elves could win this duel. No matter if it was Aurora or Deanna, they were both experts who had opened 6 chakras. Once they unleashed their chi, their basic strength could even surpass that of a 5-star lion beast. Therefore, it was hard to say who would win this duel. While he was thinking, the surrounding noise became slightly sluggish. Dake raised his head and saw that today's strongest opponent, Deanna, had come on stage. After not seeing her for 3 weeks, Deanna seemed to have grown a little taller. The meat on her face also seemed to have lessened a little. She ran in front of Camilla in a hurry. As soon as she entered the arena, she looked around without any fear. Then her eyes suddenly lit up. Like a cute little deer, she ran over while skipping. When she ran in front of Dake, she suddenly stopped. She tapped the ground with the tip of her foot, turned around, and sat on the other side of Dake with a smile. "Deanna is here. 4 and 1 8000 plus, 90/233. There will be more today, please know." You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.